Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the MoeGamer podcast. I'm Pete Davison from MoeGamer.net and I'm joined once again by my good friend Chris Kasky from MrGilderPixels.com. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm just peachy. How are you, Pete?
Not bad, not bad. It's cooled off a bit today. We're having a nice rainstorm shower today rather than the exhausting heat we've had for the last few days, so that's nice. Unfortunately, it's coincided with my mother-in-law coming to visit and wanting to do the garden, but now it's raining and they can't do that, so which is a shame. Yeah, it's a shame. I like her coming down because by the time she leaves, either the house or the garden or both is always nicer. Dear, but I'm sure they'll find something to do. My wife has been on a DIY kick during the whole lockdown thing, so
oh yeah,
so there's been plenty going on. We've completely refloored our hallways. We've got a new carpet down the stairs. She's going to refloor the bathroom at some point, and I'm just sitting here saying I'm staying out of the way.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So plan for today is to follow our three-part format. So we're going to start with a bit of news in this first segment. And then in our second segment, we'll talk a little bit about what we've been playing recently. And our third segment today is our topic-based discussion, where we'll be taking a closer look at the work of Inti Creates from over the years. So this is something I've done a cover game feature on in MoeGamer in the past, but there's also a side of Inti Creates that I haven't really explored before, so Chris is going to help fill in some of the blanks in my knowledge there. But to begin with the news. So this is in no particular order. This is just things that we've gathered over the course of the last few weeks or so. Beginning with, there is a mech strategy RPG called Dual Gear, which is slated to release for early access on July the 29th on Steam, which is not long after this podcast will air, so you should be able to download that for PC shortly. And there are PlayStation 4, Xbox One and Switch versions following in 2021, presumably once the early access period is over and done with. So, I mean, I don't really need to ask why this has attracted your attention, but but I mean, is there anything sort of specific about this other than it being mechs? Do you know anything about the developer and publisher? I don't think I've heard of either of them before. It's developed by Orbital Speed Studio and published by Corsair Technology. They're not names I'm familiar with.
No, I hadn't heard of either of these guys prior. I just got really excited about this because when I watched this footage, I couldn't believe how much it looked like the PS2 Front Mission game.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an amazing game, Front Mission 4.
Yeah.
And now this isn't exactly aping Front Mission. I believe this is also going to have some active third-person shooter elements, according to some of the descriptions. So it's definitely its own game in a lot of ways, but it's clear from both the designs of the mech and the kind of this clean, boxy look that whoever worked on this is very much fans of Front Mission. And as someone who doesn't understand why the last two games set in the Front Mission universe have been third-person action or stealth games and not mech strategy games, this is the closest we're going to get to a proper Front Mission. You know, because Square is obviously not interested in giving us that anymore. So, yeah, that looks pretty cool, actually. And yeah, judging from the description on their Steam page at the moment, it sounds like there's turn-based layers, as they call it. It's an extremely high-angle map called Tactical View. There's a bit of English going on in this description, I think. I'm not sure the exact origin of them, but there's definitely some strange phrasing. Do it through the extremely high-angle map called Tactical View. Before selecting the chosen unit to roll out, observe your contact zone and make efficient management in turn-based combat style. But then it also separately mentions mech-based action shooting in combat mode. So it sounds as if you sort of make high-level tactical decisions and then sort of actually be able to jump into the mech and control it directly to do some of the combat side of things. So I'm wondering if it won't be a little bit like Valkyria Chronicles. Like that sounds exactly like Valkyria Chronicles.
Yeah.
Which would be welcome because those games are ace.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, for sure. So, that's looking nice. And as I say, that's coming to early access on Steam on July the 29th of 2020, and PS4, Xbox One, and Switch versions coming in 2021. So keep an eye out for that, and check out the early access version if you want to get an early look at it. Continuing on,
So, just recently, Koei Tecmo and Gust announced that Atelier Ryza is getting a direct sequel. So, in breaking with the Atelier series tradition, it's actually a direct sequel involving the same lead character. So, it's Atelier Ryza 2, Lost Legends and the Secret Fairy. Ryza was a huge success, both in Japan and overseas. At least partly because of the main character, but also it was a very good game as well. From what I've heard, I haven't played it myself yet, but it is, as most of you know, on the list for the Atelier Mega Feature, which has just had a new entry added to the end of it. Ryza was extremely popular enough to justify doing another game with her. So it may be breaking somewhat with Atelier series tradition, but it's completely understandable from a business perspective.
If they make a third one, it's just going to be called like Atelier Ryza 3. Look at them shorts. Because let's be honest. There's a reason.
It'll be Atelier Ryza 3 MILF in shorts, won't it? Let's face it. Yeah. But yeah, this was revealed during the Nintendo Direct Mini that Nintendo did in Japan. For some reason, it was omitted from the Western versions of the Nintendo Direct Mini. Because the Japanese one was broadcast at pretty much the same time, everyone was immediately all over this trailer, and Koei Tecmo was on Twitter immediately afterwards confirming that yes, it was coming west and everything. So I mean, that's not a surprise to anyone, but still, it's nice to have it confirmed. So yeah, not a lot of details about the game itself yet. But there's an announcement trailer out now at the time of recording, and there's apparently going to be a special movie in both English and Japanese premiering on July the 29th, which again will be just after this podcast initially broadcasts. So watch out for that if you want to know a bit more or see whatever that is. Yeah, I'm always up for more Atelier, so there we go. Next up, as part of the aforementioned Nintendo Direct Mini, one Japanese game that was announced for Western audiences is that Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, aka Lucifer's Call over here in Europe, is getting an HD remaster for PS4 and Switch. It looks like it's going to go back to being called Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne in Europe this time around, rather than the inexplicable name change it had last time. I don't really know the reason behind that, but I do have a copy of the PS2 version, but haven't played it yet, as with so many things. But yeah, you're quite a fan of this game, aren't you?
Yeah, very much so. As someone who appreciates the mainline SMT games, this is great news. It's also cool because we're going to be getting the second version of the game, which was released after. For people who aren't like super big fans of SMT, one of the coolest things about Nocturne was that Atlas worked a licensing deal out with Capcom, and Dante from Devil May Cry was a guest character.
Yes, I mean that's a meme now, isn't it?
yeah. So obviously later versions, when that license was no longer applicable, they made a different version of the game where the guest character was Raido Kuzunoha, which was one of the characters from the spin-off SMT series.
Yes. Yes.
So he replaces Dante. So I'm really excited to have that version of the game, like an excuse to buy that version of the game, which is very cool. But yeah, this is a very traditional SMT game, right? So this doesn't have, what everyone associates with like Persona. It doesn't have the visual novel elements. It's just very much a hardcore, challenging, collect your monsters and battle them in a post-apocalyptic Tokyo where everything is possessed by demons, and there's a heavy morality element and occasional first-person dungeon crawling, which is very much a harkening back to the ancient days of the series. It plays with that stuff a little bit. Just a great PS2 era RPG for people to revisit.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'm just looking up to see if I can find any of the reasons for the name change in Europe. There doesn't seem to be an actual reason for it. But interestingly, this was one of the first games released by Ghostlight, who are a localization company who are still doing great work today. So yeah, this was one of their first ones. Never knew that they were a subsidiary of Midas Interactive, beloved of shovelware enthusiasts everywhere. But there you go. Anyway, along with the Nocturne news, we also had confirmation that Shin Megami Tensei 5 is launching in 2021 worldwide. So we got some new details on that as well, which people have been waiting for a very long time, to such a degree that sort of waiting for Shin Megami Tensei 5 news became a bit of a meme on Twitter. I think there's at least one Twitter account that is like posting the same picture every day until we get new Shin Megami Tensei 5 news. And they've had to stop now after something like 900 days.
I mean, it's hardly news, but it's just like, hey, everybody, it still exists.
Yeah, it still exists. Yeah. So it's confirmed for launching on Switch in 2021 as a simultaneous global release. So you're not going to have to wait for a localization of that, which is nice. But yeah, nothing more specific than 2021 at the minute.
I'm sorry, he said, I'll take it. I love mainline SMT.
Yep, fair enough. All right, continue on with more Nintendo Direct Mini news. We have had an announcement that Cadence of Hyrule, which is the Zelda-themed spin-off of Crypt of the Necrodancer, is getting a physical release in October of 2020. So that is going to have the base game plus all of the new season pass content. So the season pass content has just been released for the original game. I think the original game came out, was it last year? I think. Hard to tell at this point with the strange distortion of time we're experiencing at the minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, the season pass incorporates 3 downloadable content packs, which has 5 new characters, some new remixes of music, and a new story mode map featuring Skull Kid. So the physical version is going to feature all of that, hopefully on the cartridge itself. Whereas those of you who bought the digital version will be able to, well, you already can pick up the season pass, I think. So, yeah, I'm glad I waited on this now, because I've wanted to play this for ages and have sort of hovered over the buy button on the eShop lots of times, but never quite pulled the trigger. But now I can get a lovely copy for my shelf, which is nice.
Yeah. I am just... I forget constantly how gorgeous the pixel art in this game is.
Oh, it's glorious. Yeah, this is one of those games that just has such a wonderful audiovisual aesthetic. It just looks and sounds wonderful. It's just beautiful. It really is, and so is the original Crypt of the Necrodancer as well. So
I'd also love a physical version of that.
Yes. Has there not been one of those? That feels like something that there should have been a release of already, but maybe not.
Yeah. No, I'd have it.
Yeah. For sure. All right. Carrying on. Sakuna of Ryza and Ruin has been confirmed to launch on November the 10th in North America, November 12th in Japan, and November the 20th in Europe. So late 2020, basically. This is the new game developed by Edelweiss, isn't it? Who made Asterbreed, which is a wonderful shoot 'em up. But this is it's an action RPG, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah, I think it's a side-scrolling action RPG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we are. So refined side-scrolling platform action, and it's also got simulation elements as well. So sort of along with the side-scrolling platforming, you're also sort of planting crops and cultivating various harvests and rice and that sort of thing, and building a home and that sort of thing. And it's all based on Japanese mythology, and it looks lovely.
Yeah, I'm stunned by like the artwork. Even like, I'm not usually one to vie in for like the collector's edition if there's going to be a collector's and a standard edition, because I don't really care about having stuff. Yeah, but I almost want to get the collector's edition of this just because of how stunning the box art and everything is.
Yeah, it's lovely, and the in-game visuals are sort of really colourful and lush, and sort of got heavy sort of colour saturation on them, so they're really vibrant and that sort of thing. And it's Yeah, looking absolutely lovely. I mean, this isn't a surprise from Edelweiss, who, I mean, Asterbreed looks wonderful, and some of their lesser-known stuff is really nice as well. This actually reminds me, in terms of presentation, slightly of a game they did called Fairy Bloom Freesia, which
I'm
is
familiar with that one.
which is like a platform beat 'em up, basically, that they did before Asterbreed. That you can get on PC with Steam, so that's a game I like, and it sort of looks like this is kind of building on some of the things they did in that game in terms of gameplay, and then adding the whole simulation metagame to it as well. So yeah, this is going to be lovely, and this is coming out via it's Marvelous, isn't it, who are bringing this to Europe, and Xseed in North America. So yeah, so in North America, there's going to be a standard and a divine edition. So the divine edition actually isn't horrendously expensive. It's only $60. That includes an outer box with exclusive artwork, the game itself, an art book with 130 pages of illustrations, a full soundtrack of 42 songs on 3 CDs, and a Omamori charm. Not sure what that is, but something Japanese. But yeah, so the standard version of that game is going to be $39.99 in North America, and the Divine Edition will be $59.99. Marvelous Europe is also doing standard and limited editions. The standard edition is £34.99 or €39.99, and £49.99 or €59.99. Don't know if they're doing the same limited edition offhand. Because Marvelous sometimes does their own thing in Europe compared to what Xseed does, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But it sounds like they're doing something similar.
Sure.
Cool. Right. Carrying on. A few episodes back, we talked about Onion Games bringing its game called Moon back. And they have finally launched the teaser website for that game, which includes an English screenshot of Moon, which is very encouraging to see. The Switch version of Moon has been out for just under a year in Japan, and there's a physical version coming on October the 15th, but they haven't announced any details of when the English version is coming yet, but it does appear to be coming based on this screenshot. So there's more details coming on July the 31st of 2020, so shortly after this podcast airs again. Keep an eye out for the official website, and in the meantime there's a teaser up where you can have a look at that screenshot. Not much more to say on that right now, I don't think, but yeah, be intrigued to check this out, because I mean, we talked about this a lot when this was first confirmed and announced, but yeah, this sounds like a really, really interesting game, and it's good that it's getting a second chance. Next up, WayForward has said that its Game Boy Color games Shantae and Xtreme Sports are going to get a release on Switch, and Limited Run Games are doing limited print physical editions of both of those games, both for Switch and on Game Boy Color reproduction cartridges as well. So if you finally want to own a copy of Shantae for Game Boy Color without paying £300 for it, for a cart only that's probably a reproduction anyway, now you will be able to do that. Yeah, so I mean, this is great. The original Shantae is a really cool game that I mean, they did do a digital re-release on 3DS, but I tend to find a lot of people just aren't very aware of digital stuff on 3DS, just because the eShop on that is so shit for discoverability. But yeah, the Game Boy Color version has been on 3DS for ages, but it having a Switch release and a limited run physical release will bring it to a much wider audience, which is great. I covered Shantae, the whole series, on MoeGamer a while back, so check that out if you want to know a little bit more. But suffice to say, it is a fantastic game that you should definitely check out. Xtreme Sports, I don't know. Are you familiar with this one at all?
No, I mean, so like there was a time in WayForward's earliest days where I just like assumed their games were garbage, right? Because it was like, because I was like a crappy teenager, and I was like, what is this dumb Western company that's just like aping an anime aesthetic? Like, these games probably aren't good. Yeah. And also, like, why would I ever play an Xtreme Sports game on Game Boy Color? Mm-hmm. Like, so I never played this. I knew nothing about it, but it does apparently have some light RPG elements. Yeah, so who knows? It's WayForward. I want to play it now because WayForward or die. Like, they're the best. So yeah, no, I don't know this game at all. But in my
experienced sort of revisiting some of WayForward's earlier stuff through emulation and things like that. Yeah, there's some really cool stuff. Like, I remember checking out I think it was the Sabrina the Teenage Witch game.
Yeah, and it's really good.
And it's another Shantae game.
Yeah. Or no, is that the Wendy the Witch game, the Casper one? Every Which Way?
Yeah.
That's really good. Basically, what's insane about WayForward is this is like a total tangent, right? But like, WayForward often makes licensed games in an effort to obviously keep the studio running and fund their passion projects.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, like, WayForward's licensed games are goddamn solid games. Yeah. So it's like hilarious because they made a Thor game when the first Thor movie came out.
Yeah.
Marvel's Thor for the DS. It's a ridiculously beautiful side scroller made with like all the same like love and like attention to pixel art quality that their passion project games are. It just happens to be a Marvel licensed game. It's a solid game. Same thing, they did a game based on that Hotel Transylvania property.
Yeah,
and it like it's a solid side scroller that I've heard people compare to like Castlevania. Yeah. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, but so they just make good games, even though they're usually working with like a weird license. So
yeah,
they're a fascinating company to explore.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some footage of this Xtreme Sports game now. This looks great.
Yeah, I've never played it, but like it has a good reputation. Like, retrospectively, but like back in the day, right? Like, let's be honest, the Game Boy Color specifically was shovelware paradise.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you see something that's like Xtreme Sports with like back in the day, like it was really easy to shrug off. So Shantae was really easy to shrug off. That's why the cart goes for like $1 million, right? Like, one of the the story behind Shantae is Shantae launched at the same time from Capcom as Resident Evil Gaiden. And in order to buy Resident Evil Gaiden, distributors were forced to purchase copies of Shantae with Resident Evil Gaiden just to move it out.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really treated with respect, and it wasn't really out in a time where there was interest in a game like this. Like, you couldn't have even really advertised it for what it was. People, like, only like the hardest of the hardcore would have been like, oh, okay, this is essentially a tribute to Wonder Boy. Like, nobody would have picked up on that in the time. It was before the internet was at its apex, and like game journalism online and like retro, the whole retro phase. Like, this was an indie side scroller, retro infused indie side scroller before it was even a thing, really, when you think about Shantae.
Yeah.
Way ahead of its time, and this Xtreme Sports probably is too. But yeah, I would encourage anybody. Obviously, this news is exciting about these two, but to check out any of WayForward's back catalog. I know I've mentioned Sigma Star Saga on this podcast many times before for the Game Boy Advance. That's a super innovative game that I super recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really excited about this Xtreme Sports thing now. Like I say, I'm just looking at some footage of it while we talk here, and like the pixel art, and this is lovely.
Yeah,
there's some lovely sort of Shantae style cutscenes. The female protagonist Guppy is lovely.
Yeah,
yeah, and there's some of that patented WayForward titty bounce going on in the sprites as well, which is nice.
The 8-bit.
Yeah, you just look at Guppy wandering around on the field screens, and she's just jiggling all over the place. It's a delight. Wonderful. Continuing on with WayForward news, they've also teased that there's some more River City Girls stuff on the way, probably called River City Girls 0 from the sound of things. There's no details on that at the minute, but yeah, it's happening. So that's good, because River City Girls is a lot of fun. I need to finish that, actually. I haven't got around to beating it yet. But
yeah, me neither.
But yeah, that's a cool game, and sort of revisiting some of the early Technos stuff with the Evercade recently has sort of given me a new appreciation of how much Technos fan service they've put into River City Girls as well. There's like little nods to everything right back to Renegade in there as well. It's great. So yeah, they've really done a good job with that. So yeah, watch out for new news on that at some point in the near future. Next one, you're going to have to educate me on this one, because I know the name and nothing else, but Square Enix has filed a trademark for
How do you say this? Is it Live Alive or Live Alive?
I don't know. I can't. I've never heard it said. I've only read it. Right.
Well, actually, there's katakana under the title, isn't it? It's Raibu, so Live Alive, I guess. Yeah. So tell me about this, because I know this is exciting news for those who know what it is.
Yeah. So Live Alive is RPG for the Super Nintendo / Super Famicom that was never brought over to the West, never localized, from Square Enix back in just their heyday of 16-bit games where they were making lots of weird stuff and seeing what stuck.
Yeah.
And it's got a little bit of Saga DNA. Like it's basically a game with like multiple stories that you play through as a variety of characters. I think there's 7 characters overall, and it's like they're all short, like 10-hour stories or like brief stories. And just some of them are bizarre, some of them are a bit more serious. There's kind of tonal shifts. And the big deal is the battle system had like a strategic element where you actually like moved characters around on a map, but it's not a strategy RPG in a traditional sense. The battle sequence had that element, so it was kind of innovative in that sense. It was from 1994, and it was the first game directed by the fella who would then move on to direct Chrono Trigger. So it's kind of a teeth-cutting kind of thing. So if you're really interested in classic RPG pedigree and kind of the history of a lot of these developers, it's a really neat game to play.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no specific news on this yet. All it is a trademark filing, but they have filed the trademark in Australia, Europe, and Canada so far. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's sort of the first movement there's been from the series in about 26 years. So, people did sit up and pay attention when they saw it happening. So, we'll have to wait and see if anything comes of that. But fingers crossed.
Last time this happened, Romancing Saga 3 in English happened, and then there was an Asian physical copy that happened of that. So my fingers are so crossed that my middle finger hurts. This game is really neat.
Yep. All right. Next up, we've got news that a third Shadow Warrior game is on the way, which is great news because I love the previous 2.
Yes.
So there's a 17-minute gameplay video out there now if you want to see what it's all about. It seems like the sort of big thing they're hyping up in this version is a kind of free running system in there, which, to be fair, the previous 2 had in there, but it seems they're making a bigger deal of it this time. But Shadow Warrior 2 in particular has sort of a really good sense of sort of almost platform game style movement from first person perspective. Like you can double jump and air dash and all that sort of thing, and sort of climb up ledges and that kind of thing. But so this is looking very cool. It's looking authentically Shadow Warrior with lots of weird demonic entities and gore everywhere and Lo Wang spouting his usual nonsense. So I'm definitely up for this. Does it say if they're doing the same kind of RPG thing they did with Shadow Warrior 2? Because I really like that, but some people would have preferred it to be a bit more like the first one, a bit more of a sort of linear sequence of levels. It doesn't seem to say on the Steam page at the minute.
I don't know. There also appears to be like a grappling hook thing going on. Did you see that in the footage? That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So, judging by their Steam page, they are sort of selling things that have been a part of the previous Shadow Warrior things, which is sort of the mix of first-person shooting and first-person melee strikes. So, you can sort of quickly switch between those things and sort of soften up an enemy with your guns and then go in for the strike with your katana. They're specifically talking about dynamic combat arenas, which leads me to believe it's going to be a bit more like the first one, because the first Shadow Warriors felt very inspired by stuff like Painkiller, in that the levels were very much a sequence of monster arenas that you progress through. So if they return to that sort of gameplay and structure, I think that's going to make a lot of people very happy indeed, because that was a real highlight of the first one. But it sounds like the big new thing they're introducing in this is a lot of interactive structures and things within those arenas. So there'll be elements of the environment that you can make use of to
continue dealing with your enemies and so on.
Yeah, there's some great footage in the one video where there's just like a giant grind, 2 drums with like spiked teeth on him, and he like feeds the one like monster like into it. And it's like, oh, these games are great.
Yeah, I love them. Yeah, so I'm really happy that they're doing a new one because, yeah, they're really good games, and they're really technically proficient as well. Like they are some of the best looking games I think I've played for a long time. They've got kind of that sort of AAA polish on them, but they're also nicely stylized as well. So they don't go in for that sort of completely bland photorealism thing that a lot of AAA stuff goes for. They've got a very strong sense of style about them, which I really like. They
feel like a comic book. They feel like an interactive comic book.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the moment, the planned release date for that is 2021. That's all they're saying for the minute. But yeah, that's on the way, and there's a 20-minute gameplay video for you to enjoy in the meantime. Right, next up, during the Xbox event that happened recently, Sega announced Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, which no one seems to quite know exactly what it is. But it appears to be, well, they're kind of positioning it as a new game in the Phantasy Star Online 2 series, whatever that means. Yeah. Which has led a lot of people to sort of conjecture that they're going to try and pull a Realm Reborn style reboot of the game. And also, what they appear to be trying to do with it is bringing the Western and Japanese versions into sync with each other. So I think this is going to be an attempt to sort of reboot the game and get everyone on the same page in terms of content. Sega has said on Twitter specifically that your current characters and progress will matter. So if it is a new game, you'll be able to carry over your progress from the original, and if it is a Realm Reborn style reboot of it, then, well, again, you'll be able to just carry across your existing characters. So, it's not something you'll have to start afresh on. It certainly looks very nice, but we don't really know what it is. So that's that.
Yeah, I mean, they have since clarified a lot of stuff. Since the announcement, they've said that your character will be able to carry over, but your levels won't. So, like, you'll be able to use your weapons and like certain items that you've collected, but you're going to start from square one in terms of your levels.
Okay.
And your appearance can carry over, but can then later be edited. They've said it's basically a different game, and it will run in parity with 2. So, like, the 2 are planned to run simultaneously, at least for a while. It's not. It is a new game, a different game, but not a replacement necessarily. I'm sure it will replace it eventually. They've also said that the design aesthetic, the design sensibility has shifted a bit to like more like open fields instead of these like instance dungeons, the way that PSO2 currently functions. So basically, bringing it to more of like a modern standard, which makes sense because, as we talked about with PSO2, it's a lovely game, but it's also ancient, and it really shows its age these days.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's I hadn't caught up on a lot of those clarifications since. So that's good to know. All right, next thing coming up is a new game from Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima, who were the creators of Sonic the Hedgehog. They are making a new game called Balan Wonderworld, which is a what is it really?
It's old school 3D platformer.
Yeah. I mean, it
looks like Sonic and Mario, and it has a heavy, I would say more than anything, and making sense because it's Yuji Naka, right? It has major vibes of like Billy Hatcher and Knights. Yes. Yeah, there's definite Knights vibes going on with sort of floating islands and that sort of thing. It seems to be sort of floating islands in the sky, and it looks like there's environments sort of shifting and kind of twisting as you're going through them as well. Well, that might just be the perspective, but yeah, this looks really nice. It's a very colourful. The look kind of reminds me slightly of Sonic Lost World in a few places as well. Yeah, for
sort of the sort of green field segments, but yeah, in many respects, this sort of almost looks like it's going to be a best of Yuji Naka.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the whole focus of the game is on like costume changes. There's like a ton of costumes your character can shift between, and every costume is going to have different abilities and affect the gameplay in different ways.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. It's also cool because this is, I guess, the first game in what Square Enix is touting as like a whole imprint. So they've started this like Balan Studios, and I guess what they're going to do is kind of this whole Balan, whatever that is going to be a kind of a play space for like other developers and stuff to make kind of different sorts of games set in this like common universe.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. I love when studios do stuff like that because you get some really weird games out of it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, and sort of them specifically trying to open it up to other developers and people within Square Enix and its partners. They've said so it's not just going to be internal Square Enix developers; it's going to be people who work with Square Enix as well. Yeah, potentially very interesting that, and I'm definitely interested to see what Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima come up with next. These very colourful, very smooth looking, some lovely character designs. The sort of costume side of things looks like a lot of fun. Yeah, well up for this. When is it coming? It says... So far we've only had Xbox One and Xbox Series X versions. Sorry, no, the Xbox Showcase confirmed the Xbox One and Xbox Series X versions, but it's subsequently been confirmed that Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 and PC versions are coming as well.
Could this be the first PS5 game I'm excited about?
Could well be. Yeah, that's coming in spring 2021, so keep an eye out for that. Next up, Dragon Quest 11S is getting an Xbox One and PS4 release. So this is the enhanced, expanded Switch version is now getting backported to Xbox One and PS4, and they're releasing it as a separate game rather than as a DLC or patch for the original version, which a few people have been a bit unhappy about, but other people have pointed out that Dragon Quest 11S actually runs on a completely different engine, so yeah, it's not just a case of porting the new content into the old game. They've had to sort of rebuild the game and then put that new stuff in there. So they've said that the visuals will be different from the original, presumably reflecting the new engine, which a lot of people have interpreted as they will have a downgrade.
Yeah, it totally will.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But basically, the important thing here is that you're getting all of the additional content that was in the subsequent Switch release of the game. So if you've been holding off on Dragon Quest 11 because for whatever reason you didn't want to play it on Switch, or you wanted to see if this was going to happen, well, now it's happening. So yeah, it's coming to Xbox One and will be available on Xbox Game Pass as well. So if you're a subscriber to that, you'll be able to play that through there. Which is cool. Microsoft seems like it's going to really be pushing Game Pass in particular with the new generation of Xbox. So expect a lot of fairly big name stuff to show up on there. I mean, it already does, but yeah, a lot of stuff. Seeing something like Dragon Quest on there is encouraging. But I mean, it's still a subscription service, so it's still not something I'm personally and particularly interested in. But I know people have a lot of nice things to say about Game Pass. It seems to be quite good value if you're into that kind of distribution.
Yeah, it's become clear that it is the essentially becoming the identity of the new Xbox.
Yeah,
like I mean, don't forget, much like the PS5, there is a disk driveless version of the new Xbox, right? So happening.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Eiyuden Chronicle?
Yeah. Okay, so Eiyuden Chronicle is a new Kickstarter project from a company called Rabbit and Bear Studios. But yeah, this is a team spearheaded by the people who made Suikoden. So it's Yoshitaka Murayama and Junko Kawano, who are coming back together for the first time in 25 years. This new game has only been announced for PC so far, but given the sort of connections to Suikoden, there's no way this isn't going to meet its funding goal and exceed it by ridiculous proportions.
It seems to me like it's all a ploy, right? To make console versions a stretch goal. Like what they've essentially done is put a carrot and stick in there to. I guarantee people are going to push it past its funding goal into the stretch goal.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I don't want this on PC.
No.
Why on earth would you want... Why? Like, I get that over the years, their Japanese-style RPGs have become a staple on PC, but, like, dear God, why would you want why would you want a spiritual successor to Suikoden on PC exclusively? Like... This is coming to console. Someone's going to press a physical copy of it. So let's just clear up the pretense. Let's put the physical copy $70 buy-in reward tier on that Kickstarter from the get-go so I can throw $70 at it. Because what's happening now is I'm going to throw $5 at it.
Yeah.
But then if a console version gets released, then I'll pitch in if a physical copy tier is added. Like... Just stop the dance, and let's give the people what they want.
Yeah.
Let me treat it like a pre-order, and then you can have more of my money right up front.
Yeah. Well, so it's worth noting at the time of recording, as we're recording on the 25th of July, the Kickstarter is set to launch on July the 27th, so no one's actually sort of seen the full details of it yet, like what they're asking for or what the stretch goals are. So it's entirely possible that they will announce console versions as part of this Kickstarter. So we'll have to wait and see. But by the time you listen to this, that Kickstarter will hopefully be up and running, and you can throw your money at it. So in terms of the game, it's a 2.5D game, so taking the kind of approach that Octopath Traveler did. So you've got these lovely sort of pixel art sprites and what appear to be three-dimensional backgrounds that have a very sort of lovely hand-painted look to them. And in true Suikoden style, there's 100 characters to recruit for your army. Battles will be turn-based with parties of 6, and there will apparently be elements of building towns in there as well. So it is a new Suikoden game in all but name, from the sound of things.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, even look at the characters. If you look at the two main characters, it's just the two main characters from Suikoden 2.
Yeah.
Like, they're not even trying to, like, disguise it. It is. Like, but seriously, have you watched that video? If that's legit what the combat looks like in this game, I'm going to lose my mind. That was so, like, dynamic and, like, beautifully presented. I mean, I'm sure it was just proof of concept, but if that's anything like what they're hoping to have in the game, like, every battle is going to be, like, a feast for the eyes. Like, that was ridiculous. Characters were, like, perched, not just, like, in a line, but, like, actually positioned around an environment. And, like, it would almost look like a pop-up book. How they were, like, parallax layers. And, like, the characters would, like, jump in and attack. And there was, like, dynamic camera zooming. Like, it was very much a... it had the feel of, like, Suikoden 2's battle system. How that kind of had, like, these dynamic camera zooms and stuff. But just, like, enhanced with, obviously, like, modern capabilities. And the whole thing had this beautiful painterly... design aesthetic to it. It's double enhanced by the fact that one of the characters is like a painter with a paintbrush as a weapon. It's just this thing could be beautiful if it really looks like this kind of prototype footage.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing a bit more of that. So, like I say, by the time you listen to this podcast, that Kickstarter will probably be up and running. If not, it'll be later in the day. So go check that out and throw your money at it if it's something you want to see more of. Okay, a few more things to go through. We have had an announcement that the Ask Iwata interviews that Nintendo used to publish on their website before Iwata sadly passed away is getting a book collecting all of these interviews together. And it's going to be released as both digital and print. And the print version looks like it's going to be like a lovely hardback copy of this. So this is something I want, because I've in researching things for MoeGamer, I've referred to so many Ask Iwata interviews over the years, because
Oh yeah,
it's such a great way of. I mean, Iwata is a character in his own right, but he asks really insightful questions, and those interviews provide great insights into all sorts of different games from over the years. So it's always been fascinating. So to have all of those collected into a book will just be delightful. So that's going to be published by Viz Media, and that's coming in spring 2021. So keep an eye out for that then. Other things, we talked about Fight Crab a few episodes ago. Fight Crab is releasing on September the 15th of 2020. So from then, you will be able to enjoy crab fighting action game Fight Crab. Yeah. Anything more to add about Fight Crab?
No, just I remember how excited we were about it last time, so when I saw we had an official Western release date, I knew I had to share. Because I want to be a spider crab with drill arms and fight a lobster with a chain hook. Like this.
Oh, dear. Right. Okay, last thing we got for today is that Thunderful Publishing and the SteamWorld developers Image and Form Games have announced a game called The Gunk, which is coming to Xbox Series X, Xbox One, and PC. We're doing a lot of Xbox news today. That's surprising for us.
A lot of interesting games came from that event. I can't help it. I mean, most of them were also confirmed for PlayStation platforms.
Yes.
This is the only game out of that event that... Well, that's a lie. I would love to get my hands on that new Rare game, too.
Yeah.
But this was one of the few games that, for that event, weren't eventually reconfirmed as multi-platform. This has not been talked about for, say, Switch or PlayStation platforms yet, but it is for the PC. So if it's not on PlayStation, I'll be able to play it on the PC.
Yeah.
But I just really like Image and Form's work. I haven't played anything by them that I didn't really enjoy.
Yeah.
Specifically, they do a lot of the kind of design work I like, where they take a specific genre and then innovate within that genre in unique ways. So, like, SteamWorld Heist is an example of really good design that I like to talk about, where they said, well, let's make a traditional strategic turn-based game, but we're going to put it in the context of a side-scroller. So it's like a strategy RPG that plays out as a side scroller. Or like when they decided that they were going to make a turn-based RPG, they made sure to mix it with a collectible card game. So like they're really interested in kind of unique plays with genre and mechanics. So this is a 3D platformer. So I'm really curious to see what they do with the 3D platformer.
Yeah. So the concept of this game is that there's a planet has been sort of taken over by this gunk, which is a slimy parasite, and your main character's got this power glove that can absorb the gunk and make use of it for various purposes. So you can manipulate the environment with it, or you can attack enemies with it, and you explore these sort of varied environments. From the look of things, you've got this lovely sort of otherworldly landscape to explore, and caves with sort of neon glowing stones in the walls and that kind of thing. And yeah, it looks potentially very interesting. It's got a very distinctive look and feel about it. The promo art has got that sort of how would you describe that? I mean, it's a hand painted look, but it's kind of quite reminiscent of sort of old movie posters, isn't it?
I was going to say, it very much makes me think of like old movie posters, and specifically old like weird fiction magazines.
Yes,
from
yes, that's what I was thinking of. So like pulp magazines and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this looks kind of cool. And this is coming in September of 2021. Like I said, at the moment it's only been announced for Xbox Series X, Xbox One, and PC. Nothing about other platforms as yet, but I mean, you never know. There's like over a year before this is happening, so there may be.
It's gonna come.
Yeah, I'd be.
Let's like. Console wars are over.
Yeah.
Like, you just either buy whatever console you want. Like, with the exception of exclusives, like. To be a company, to make an independent game like this and not make it on both consoles, unless Microsoft paid them like $1 billion, like it would be suicide not to put it on all platforms. And even if Microsoft did pay them $1 billion, like we've seen this happen before. In like a year, they'll just be like the Gunk X, and like so it's technically a different game. It'll have all the DLC and season pass content, and then it'll come to PlayStation.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
These things don't like this. These things don't happen like they used to. I mean, the Rare game obviously will be Xbox exclusive that I mentioned because Microsoft owns Rare now. But like otherwise, you know, stuff, independent stuff like this, it's only a matter of time before it becomes even like remember Below. I mean, Below, that game from Capybara Games that was originally announced as like a big bad Xbox exclusive on their like indie games platform.
Yeah.
That's getting an enhanced edition on all platforms. So the best version of the game isn't going to be Xbox exclusive. So I don't know. Buy the console you want and you can play most things.
Yep.
The end.
Pretty much.
If you're patient.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so the majority of my games coming from limited run companies these days has taught me a lot of patience. Anyway,
I don't. Like, there's never not games to play.
No, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
I mean, I don't care anymore. I don't care about having games at launch anymore. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't play multiplayer or online stuff at all, so it doesn't matter to me if I don't play something at launch. It doesn't even really matter to me about sort of quote unquote being part of the conversation when something comes out, because
that's the only other big reason if you're not into the multiplayer, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like a lot of the conversations these days are so predictable anyway that it's not until people have spent sort of a good amount of time with these games and divorced it from the context of release hype and so on, and any sort of release controversies and so on, that you start to get the really interesting discussion over these games anyway. So I mean, this is why I'm currently covering a PS2 RPG from 2009 in great detail.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I buy into hype a little bit because I like to watch trailers, and like I want to play these games, but I know I won't play them seriously at launch anyway because I'm always playing something older. So like, I think back to like recently, like of course, specifically, like I have a degree in East Asian history, right? Like that is what my bachelor's degree is in interdisciplinary history and government studies with a focus on East Asia. Like I studied Japanese history for 4 years of my life. Like I have a piece of paper that says I know a lot about it. So obviously, like I was super excited about everything about Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
Right? Like wow, a really interesting game exploring an often not talked about part of Japanese history. Like obviously everything about that game is like Chris needs to play this. But like I luckily I have a buddy who buys into launch hype a lot more than me, especially for AAA games. So I just played his copy for an hour to know that it was good, and now I can't wait to buy the complete edition on the PS5 in 2 years. Like I just I don't do it, and nobody will be talking about it then, so I can actually enjoy it without having to wade through the bullshit of online conversations about whether or not it's cultural misappropriation for a Western studio to make a game about samurais.
Yeah.
You can just enjoy it at my own pace.
Indeed. All right, we've gone on for nearly an hour there on news, so not bad for... we didn't say it was a quiet week this time, but yeah.
It's also been like 5 weeks since our last time.
Yeah, exactly. So plenty to talk about there. So we're going to take a short break now and probably get a drink. I certainly need one. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a bit about what we've been playing recently. So we'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. For our second segment, we're going to talk about what we've been playing recently. So, Chris, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so happy to report that I finally finished my first playthrough of Sakura Wars, the new Sakura Wars. Found the individual character ending portion of it not satisfying enough to know that I don't need to bother playing through it with any of the other characters. So I got my cute Hatsuho ending, and now I've moved on to Trials of Mana.
Oh,
which
okay.
is something
Excellent.
I've much been looking forward to playing, and I didn't even want to start it until I knew I could give it my wholehearted attention, because I'm a very big fan of the Secret of Mana series.
Excellent. So this is the new version you're playing, yeah?
Correct, yeah, not the 16-bit one. Although I will admit, as a great personal failure, that I've never played Seiken Densetsu 3 in the 16-bit version. So I'm not coming at this remake from a position of any kind of knowledge about Seiken Densetsu 3 other than what I've read. But it is thus far just a delightful 3D action RPG set in a colorful, friendly world. So Trials of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu 3, is really interesting in that it did a lot of innovative stuff that wasn't really common of 16-bit games at the time. So it took a lot of what was great about the original Secret of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu 2, and added a day-night cycle.
Oh, okay.
6 playable characters, of which when you start a file, you choose 3 of them.
Right.
So there's a tremendous emphasis on possibility for replay, because you can't have all the characters in a single playthrough. And then in an interesting move for a action RPG class system, which was not really, still isn't particularly common for action RPGs. It's usually a turn-based RPG thing. So like each character can be taken on a light or dark path that changes their ability sets. So, I'm really enjoying it so far. One of the things I like about it, I wasn't really sure what they would do with the combat in it, because one of the things I love about the original Seiken Densetsu games, at least the first one on Super Nintendo, and also subsequent kind of reboots, like I'm thinking about Sword of Mana on the Game Boy Advance. There's always been a sense with, or at least the original Seiken Densetsu games, that the combat should, in a way, have a timing and a cadence that kind of recreates the feel of it being turn-based. Like very strong hit stun, short combos with like a pause in between. It's not like an East game where you can just, like a modern East game where you just like hammer on attack and do these like flourishing combos like smoothly. there's a haltingness to it, which is intentional. So I was really happy to see that they brought that into the new one. It still feels like that. There's very much like a 3-4 hit combo, then dodge, and like there's a sense of rhythm and cadence to the combat that feels very faithful to the old 16-bit titles. So I'm really liking that. I like cute games. I like games that are set in like colorful worlds with like chubby faces and big bright eyes and pastels everywhere, and they really just took the world of the 16-bit Seiken Densetsu aesthetic and translated it beautifully into 3D modern hardware, and I'm really having a great time with it.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah,
I've heard a lot of people who've been playing this. Both people who are new to it and people who are familiar with the original have had nothing but good things to say about this, which is really good, because I know that Secret of Mana remake from a while back was not quite as well received, because it like you said a while back, it wasn't as much of a substantial reimagining of the game so much as it was a sort of reskin almost.
Yeah,
but
I'm still not quite sure what people's beef with that game is. Because maybe that is what their beef is, right? That it wasn't a substantial... it's just a reskin, basically. But like, all the problems with that game are persistent from Secret of Mana. When I used to read like people complaining about that 3D remake, people were like, well, the combat sucks and it's awkward, and that's the original Secret of Mana, because it was meant to emulate a turn-based game. So you have to strike and then pause, then move out of the way, plan your next strike. It was a very specific design, and I don't think a lot of people were prepared for that who hadn't played the original. I don't know. Not to get on that soapbox, but
no, that's fine. But if people think Secret of Mana is awkward, they obviously haven't played Final Fantasy Adventure.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I still haven't explored that collection of mana I've got, but I've got that and the remake of Trials of Mana queued up on my shelf to explore at some point. So, yeah, I will almost certainly do a mana feature at some point. But yeah, glad to hear that you're having a good time with that.
Yeah, there was a lot of room for disappointment there, so I'm very, very pleased to report that it's cool, and it helps that I currently have a party of not one but two adorable princesses and a werewolf. So I'm in a pretty good place.
Yeah, I am all about the girls in leotards in that game. It's heaven.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a good time.
Oh, dear. All right, anything else you've been up to?
No, just a lot of engagement with the Evercade. Which I don't want to talk too much about it because I think there's opportunity there for dedicated episodes.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's just say that it continues to be a delight, and I continue to make new discoveries every day with it, and just the effort that the people at Blaze have made to curate collections of interesting games and not just the stuff you expect is greatly appreciated. It's really just, I think I've come to identify that as the hallmark of this console. It's not just about playing the stuff you expect on a collection. I'm playing new old games that I never would have had an opportunity to play before, and it's just making me happy all the time.
That seems to be their exact intention with it. There's been a lot of discussions about this sort of thing on sort of the official Discord and so on, and there's like frequent discussions over like what game collections would you like to see next, and most of the time anyone who brings that, I was like if someone says, oh, I want to see like a Sega collection or something like that, a lot of people go, well, no, because I can play a Sega collection on any number of platforms at the moment. There is a Sega Genesis collection on everything going right back to like PS2. So yeah, people are more interested in seeing things from companies who don't get represented in these compilation re-releases quite so often. So like there's like there's a rich vein of Taito stuff that we haven't seen resurrected since the PS2 era, for example. Mm-hmm. There's loads of Irem stuff. There's all this stuff
top on my hit list. Irem and Kemco and Vic Takai and just all those weirdo like sub third-party developers that were like all over the place making weird shit in the 16-bit era.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's all the potential for things like exploring the European home computers and stuff as well.
Yes.
So like people have expressed a big interest in like an Amiga collection or a ZX Spectrum collection and that sort of thing. So
I would love a Cyanosis collection with like Shadow of the Beast.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Sort of like their Amiga stuff is sort of what we would describe today as console quality, because a lot of times you tend to think of like home computer stuff being a little bit inferior to the console stuff, but certainly the Amiga was very much capable of stuff that was on a par or better than what the Genesis, the Mega Drive, could do at the time. Like stuff like Shadow of the Beast, all that sort of thing. Just incredible smooth scrolling, digital music, immensely colourful backgrounds.
Like pre-Tomb Raider core, like Wolfchild. Or like, wouldn't it be great to have a Gremlin collection with like the old Top Gears and like Zool and so many old developers who I mean, in some cases, it's not entirely clear who the IPs ended up in the hands of. Like, for example, that Top Gear ended up with Pico, for example, because that came out via Kemco. So there's all sorts of convoluted history to sort out among there. But some of the groundwork has already been laid for some of that with things like the Spectrum Next that came out a while back and the C64 Mini and so on. So when those came out, sort of the licensing status of those games became a bit clearer, and it will make it a bit easier to get in contact with the relevant people to make these things happen again. So yeah, I think the Evercade has the potential to provide a real resurgence for a lot of stuff that we haven't seen for 30 plus years in some cases. Yeah.
Which, yeah, I'm all about, definitely. But even within the context of the stuff that is a bit more well known, like the Namco stuff, I love the fact that the Namco collections on this include stuff that I've never seen before. Like I've talked about Star Luster before, but Star Luster is a fantastic take on Star Raiders from Namco that I never knew existed until I put that cartridge in my Evercade and booted it up. I go, oh, what's this? And then I started playing it. It was like, oh my god, this is Star Raiders for the NES.
Have you played the Pac-Man puzzle game?
Yes, I was familiar with that before, but that is a great game.
I was not. And like I know I've said like 40 times whenever we talk about the Evercade, but Burning Forest is one of my favorite games of all time growing up.
Yep.
So like Burning Forest that I can take anywhere with me now is a delight.
Delightful. Yeah. Oh, you mentioned core design as well. There is a early core design game on the Pico collection in the form of Switchblade.
Yeah. Yep. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, Switchblade is a really interesting game. It seems very clunky when you first start playing it, but once you get your head around it, it's a really interesting open structure 2D platform game from the early days. So well worth taking a look at that. But as you say, we have several dedicated episodes in those Evercade games for us. So
I definitely want to specifically do an episode dedicated to the Pico collection.
Yes, absolutely.
Holy shit. and the hope that there's a Pico collection too. Please give me more of this weird stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, Pico have got a lot of stuff in their portfolio now, so I'm sure it will happen at some point. I know the Pico collection has sort of been one of the most challenging ones for the Evercade team to sort of deal with, because a lot of the stuff is based on like unfinished prototypes and stuff that never got released or localized as well. So it's been challenging for them, and there's been some games on there that have had some bugs and issues. But all credit to the people at Blaze; they have been working their asses off to get firmware updates out for the console that fix various bugs and problems. The latest firmware update for the Evercade at the time of recording allows you to remap the controls on Genesis games as well.
Shit,
so
I want it. How do you do the firmware updates? Do you hook up to USB?
Yeah, you just download a file. There's a bit of software, and you just connect the Evercade via USB, and it's dead easy. It takes like a couple of minutes.
Cool.
It's easy. So yeah, all credit to them for staying on top of that and listening to what people are saying, because it would have been so easy for them to just sort of shit out this stuff and then leave it behind and ignore it, but no, they haven't, which is great. It gives me a lot of confidence for those future releases. All right, good stuff. So like you say, there's almost definitely going to be some Evercade episodes in our near future, so look forward to them. So I guess we'll move on to what I've been playing recently then. So main thing I've been playing is Khemia 2, which I don't think I've talked about on this podcast yet, so I'll take a bit of time to talk about it now. Khemia 2 is part of the Atelier series, so I'm covering it on MoeGamer as part of my Atelier mega feature right now. It's the 10th mainline Atelier game and the 5th to be released in the West, or the 5th to be released in North America anyway, because it didn't come to Europe. Possibly because it's a PlayStation 2 game with sprites and an isometric perspective that came out in 2009. So for context, that's like the same year as Resident Evil 5 and all manner of other things as well. But that is probably the reason why it's not especially well known. But as we say so often on this thing, take stuff on its own merits in its own context and divorce it of sort of what else was going on around it at the time. This is a lovely game. It's a lovely, lovely game. It's a great Atelier game, a great RPG, and it's got a fantastic cast of characters. We talk a lot about RPGs, about how we'd like our RPG parties to be a group of goofballs, and this... I've played through one of the two main stories in this so far, and the Ulrika route in this game has one of the most dysfunctional parties I think I've ever been part of in an RPG, and it's wonderful.
So good.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a delight. It's got a fantastic soundtrack. You can really see the alchemy mechanics are developing over the course of the different games. So the next game after this one is Atelier Roriner on the PS3, which was sort of a big step forward for the alchemy system, but you can start to see them experimenting with a few of the things that would become part of the Arland series in Khemia 2. So this has been one of the things that I've been most
interested and excited to explore over the course of this mega feature is seeing how these mechanics have gradually adapted and changed over the course of all these games, because they were pumping out these games on a yearly basis, but they've made each one feel distinctive and unique in terms of mechanics and presentation and structure and story and characterization. And it's really impressive what they've achieved with this series over time. I mean, with the late release of this one, you could argue that part of that might have been achieved by sort of deliberately holding themselves back in terms of technology, which I think was probably a wise thing to do, because it means that they could then focus on the actual mechanical density and complexity of the game rather than having to make it look amazing.
It does, though. That game is a looker.
yeah, that's what I mean. Rather than being sort of like super technically impressive HD photorealistic backgrounds and so on, the Khemia games have such a gorgeous sense of style about them, with these lovely detailed sprites and these polygonal backgrounds that are sort of built of they're built of blocks, but all the blocks have like lovely details on them, and there's like foliage and trees and stuff, and it's got a very distinctive feel to it all that builds on what Atelier Iris 3 was doing with 2D backgrounds. But yeah, it looks great, and it looks lovely in motion, and the battle sequences are gorgeous, with these ridiculous special attacks and howling guitar music and that sort of thing. It's just an absolute delight to play. And yeah, so like I say, I'm sort of technically halfway through the game now, but when you finish one of the two protagonist stories in that game, you can carry over all of your stuff into the other protagonist story. So
you don't, like a new game plus.
Yeah, basically. And that's really important in this game because of how the progression system works. So rather than having a straightforward experience level system, you have a mechanic called the Grow Book in the Khemia games, where you basically unlock cards based on the things that you've crafted, and then those cards each have some stat increases or abilities attached to them, which you then spend points that you earn through combat on. So the core of the progression system is down to crafting all of these items, but because you carry over everything you've crafted in your first playthrough into your second playthrough, from the start of that new game, you'll have most of these cards unlocked, aside from the stuff that is unique to the characters on the other side of the story. So that will save a huge amount of time for that second playthrough, because you don't have to sort of spend 2 hours at the start of every chapter crafting all your new recipes, because most of them you'll have already done.
That reminds me a bit of the system in... Do you remember Tales of Xillia?
Yes.
But like how you would... Everything you would achieve in your playthrough would unlock a point system, and then
that's right, the titles.
In the next New Game Plus, you would use that currency that you earned through your score in your first playthrough to unlock things to assist you in the New Game Plus. So
that's right. Yeah, you could like boost your experience rate and item drops and all that sort of thing, couldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like a pure New Game Plus because they wanted there to still be some level of challenge in the next playthrough. So you had to choose, like, do I want to take all my weapons with me, or do I want to take my levels with me? And like, so it was a boost, but it wasn't like an unfair, like, you're going to play the game, all your guys are going to be level 50 immediately, and you're just going to rip through everything. Like, there was a... You got some stuff, but you still had to also earn some stuff. And I kind of appreciated that take on the formula.
Yeah, definitely. It makes that second playthrough feel less like you're just sort of going through the motions for the sake of the story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a very similar situation in Khemia too, because although you unlock all of these cards, you've still got to earn the points in order to actually activate the abilities on these. So the characters still start as low level and not very strong, and you still have to earn the points through combat. You just don't have to spend as much time crafting items, which is good, because although that side of things is fun in Khemia 2, you don't necessarily then want to spend another 50 hours crafting the exact same items you did in your previous playthrough. So
sure.
So I'm having a ton of fun with that. I need to romp through the second story and the extra story that unlocks once you've done both of the main protagonist thing. There's like a true ending at the end of that. So it'll probably be a couple more weeks before I'm done with that. Aside from that, the only other thing I've been playing is something I probably want to talk about in a bit more detail on another episode, but I'll mention it now because it's on my mind, and that is Test Drive Unlimited.
Oh, yeah.
So Test Drive Unlimited is an Xbox 360 game from 2006, which is 3 years before Khemia 2 came out on PS2. And it's an open world driving game that I really liked back in the day, but it got a bit of criticism from reviewers for the handling not being very realistic. But that is precisely why I like it, because Test Drive Unlimited is basically a celebration of obnoxious rich people and car culture. But what they've done is they've combined the sort of car collecting aspect of games like Gran Turismo and Forza Motorsport with a more arcadey handling model. So you've got the inherently satisfying thing of building up this massive collection of real cars that you've sort of only drooled over in real life. But they're all drivable, rather than sort of having to slow down to 20 miles an hour to go around a corner like you do in Gran Turismo.
Sure.
So you have kind of the best of both worlds thing going on. You have a game that sort of accurately simulates the glamorous lifestyle of someone who has more money than sense, buying cars and properties around the Hawaiian island of Oahu, and then filling all those garages with various cars and motorbikes and that sort of thing. But then you've got handling that sort of allows you to take corners sideways and sort of smash through cars without any real consequence, aside from the police occasionally coming to chase you. And it's just a ton of fun. It's a really fun game, and I blogged about this for patrons last night. But it's a game that I like just playing, even if I don't have a real sort of purpose. It's a game where you can just enjoy the free ride mode and just drive around this loving recreation of Oahu in these beautifully rendered 3D cockpits, especially considering this came out in 2006. It still looks good, and it's fun to just drive in this game. It's there's the incentive to explore around the place and find car dealerships and new events and stuff. But it's fun to just drive around the island and have fun. I can't remember if I've talked about my I don't know if I want to call it a theory, but I'll call it that anyway. My theory of summer games on this podcast previously in the past. But whenever summer rolls around, I have a particular craving to play very specific types of game. Not sure what triggers that, whether it's like the weather or just like the general atmosphere or the kind of lethargy that summer kind of gets into people's minds. But whenever summer rolls around and the weather gets warm, I'm always in the mood to play stuff that is sort of relaxing and chilled out to play. So stuff that doesn't necessarily have a particular end goal and isn't especially demanding on you, but is enjoyable to play and engaging enough to sort of just sit back on your sofa and enjoy without having to think about too hard. So Test Drive Unlimited very much fits into that category. Stuff like Dead or Alive Xtreme fits into that as well, because it's just a game that you just play to enjoy. It's not trying to say anything. It's not trying to do anything particularly mechanically complicated. It's just saying, well, here's a toy box to have some fun with while it's warm. Just switch your brain off, drive some cars, look at some pretty girls, do that sort of thing. So yeah, Test Drive Unlimited very much fits into my idea of summer games, but I haven't actually revisited it since I originally played it back in like 2006, 2007 or so. So it's been a real pleasure to come back to this game and rediscover what I liked about it the first time around. And again, as we said before, sort of divorcing it of the original context and those original reviews that were like, "Ooh, the cars don't handle right." You can just appreciate it a lot more. You can just enjoy it and have fun with it. And yeah, it was originally marketed as sort of quite a multiplayer-centric thing because they had this big sort of massively multiplayer thing going on where players would appear in your game world and drive around. I don't miss that side of things, to be honest, because there's so much sort of single-player stuff in that game that you can enjoy it. And they even went so far as to, when you're playing offline, which you don't have an option to play online anymore because the servers got taken down in like 2012, I think. They've got sort of simulated opponents who are driving around the world as well, so you can still have the same sort of experience of challenging people who are driving around the island. They're just not real people anymore, which is, fine by me.
Not fond of real people.
Yeah.
That sounds cool. I like I've never played this, obviously, because I'm not a huge racing games guy, but I do like Burnout Paradise.
Yeah.
And it sounds a bit like Burnout Paradise, but with real cars.
Yeah, it's a bit like sort of the structure of Burnout Paradise, so without all the top crashing and stuff.
No jumps.
I mean, there are bits on the island where you can sort of fling your car over the crest of a hill and it will leave the ground, but it's not like sort of super exaggerated stunts and crashing through billboards and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you can still do some silliness, and as far as I'm aware, it's the only driving game where you can plunge a Vauxhall Golf into the Pacific Ocean while listening to Ride of the Valkyries. So,
think about Burnout Paradise, and like it's basically the same thing. Like, I like Burnout Paradise, and like half the time when I'm playing Burnout Paradise, I don't even participate in the game, and I don't even do the extreme shit. Like, sometimes I play Burnout Paradise and I like lock it in at 55 and I just like drive down the shore.
Yeah. This you would probably enjoy this then. So
I'm already looking at copies on eBay.
Yeah. I mean, there is like a specific achievement for discovering every road on the island. So like, as you drive around, the roads that you've driven on your GPS get painted in a highlighted colour. So there's this really satisfying sort of metagame of just driving around and painting all these roads and sort of seeing what you can discover. And that's like a completely unimportant part of the game's sort of overarching structure, but it's a satisfying challenge you can do in your own right. And like there's a race in this game that is 118 miles long that takes you around the entire island as well.
That's awesome.
And that sort of thing is awesome, yeah.
Is the second one any good?
I haven't played the second one. I own a copy, but I haven't tried it yet. I know the second one was a bit buggy on launch, but I think that was mostly down to the PC version and mostly to do with the multiplayer side of things. So again, that might actually be a better experience now. The second one is basically more of the same. And in fact, it sort of basically doubles the amount of content in that it brings back the island of Oahu that was in the first one, but then there's also the island of Ibiza in there as well.
Oh, neat.
You can drive around.
Okay. I'm just looking like at what's available, and I have a launch Xbox 360.
Yeah.
So like no HDMI. So like I the original from the looks of it was only available on the 360 or PS2. But the second one I can get on my PS3. So like if I want to check this out, I think that's probably the route I would take.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is quite an early Xbox 360 game. Like it's so old that here in PAL territories it has a warning on the front of the box that this will only work on 60 hertz televisions. Oh, wow. That's how you can tell an old 360 game for all the people who are still struggling along with 50 hertz CRTs, like I did when I first got my Xbox. But yeah, so it's worth checking out, and you can probably find it super cheap these days as well. So Xbox 360 games in general are incredibly cheap right now. I wandered down to my local second-hand game store the other day and picked up an armful of games, and it cost me like £15 for 20 games. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now, just like this notion that we both have this urge to like pick up all these games that were like super interesting to us back in the day, but not interesting enough that we could justify paying full price, that like may or may not have gotten like shat on at the time of their release. Like I know a couple months ago you and I had a bee in our bonnet about playing Dark Void, that like rocket pack focused game with like the pulpy sci-fi aesthetic that like Capcom developed.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about Dark Sector, which was a really interesting third-person shooter where you had like a glaive, like Krull.
Yes. Yeah, and, I picked up both of those because I couldn't remember which one was which, so I got them both because they were 50p each.
Yeah, and like stuff like that I'm thinking about stuff like on the PS3, Lost Planet 2 has an incredible reputation among like game design and mechanics fans, but it was critically panned, so you can get it for like $10 now. But that game is supposed to be incredible in terms of like sense of scale and like character upgrading and collecting items metagame. Like it was an example of a game that came out that it wasn't the sequel people wanted, so people shat on it. But like now, but like in retrospect, on its own merits, it's quite an interestingly designed game. So for like the price of admission, the PS3 and Xbox 360 are like gold mines of like weird shit to play with now for very little money.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just redone the shelves in my living room, and we've deliberately made a lot more space for Xbox 360 games because, there's going to be a lot more coming into my collection very soon.
Yeah, I mean, COVID's making it difficult, obviously, but like I am specifically checking in on my secondhand shops for. I really want the last 360, the 360e. The 500 gig.
Yeah.
I think that's a really pretty, well-designed console. So like, I really want to get my hands on it because there is a ton for the 360 I want to play right now. Like, I'm thinking about like weird exclusive. Like, obviously, some of the exclusive RPGs on it are worth playing. Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon. I'm also thinking too about Magna Carta. Ever play any of the Magna Carta games? Magna Carta 2?
I haven't. No. I'm vaguely familiar with them, but I haven't played them.
They're Korean, which is so this is something we talk about frequently on this podcast. Is how much I really like playing games from other regions that aren't typically known for their game development, and to see how like the combat's part of it, but the mechanics and sensibilities of design may differ slightly from like traditional regions. Like the idea of playing a role-playing game from Korea is exciting to me. The first one, which I played on the PS2, I really enjoyed. So Magna Carta 2 is 360 exclusive, so I'd love to get a copy of it. Yeah. All kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, there's also stuff like by sort of established developers that is worth exploring as well. Stuff that doesn't get talked about as much as their big names. So like Bizarre Creations, for example, they're obviously most well known for their Project Gotham series. But I will talk anyone's ear off about Blur for one thing. But most people have probably heard of Blur because it kind of builds on what Project Gotham did. But then they've got other stuff that like they've got that James Bond game that they did, Bloodstone. Which is supposed to be really good. They've got that third-person shooter that they did called The Club as well, that I remember being quite interesting.
Yep.
And all sorts of stuff like that. There's a lot of sort of lesser-known stuff that sort of didn't get the love and appreciation it deserved. There's obviously a whole ton of Warriors games on Xbox 360 I want to pick up as well at some point.
What was that spy RPG that Obsidian did?
Oh, Alpha Protocol. That is fucking amazing. You need to play that game. It's so good. It's so good. It's so broken, but it's so good.
Yeah, it's alright. Broken's alright. I'm just trying to think of like games from that era I always wanted to play, but like never got around to playing.
So Alpha Protocol is brilliant. Another sort of underappreciated one that a lot of people bring up that I heartily endorse as well is Binary Domain from Sega.
Yeah, I have Binary Domain for the PS3.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff on the because the PS3 was a goldmine of like weird RPGs and like Japanese games who just got like pooped out, sometimes at a budget price, but also sometimes not at a budget price, so like nobody bought them.
Yeah.
So like I'm thinking about stuff like Trinity, Souls of Zilul, which I think I sent you a link for, and you're like, yeah, I have that. Yeah. Like, nobody bought that game. Like, that is... like, why was Trinity, Souls of Zilul even localized? Like, Trinity, Souls of Zilul is an action game spin-off of a Fire Emblem-style turn-based strategy game, the whole series of which was never localized.
Yeah.
But they're like, we're gonna... the existence of that game... is totally banks on the notion that I'm a Japanese fan of Zilul Infinite, and like I'm going to want to play this to see a new game set in that universe. Like without that connection, there's absolutely no reason to check that Trinity out. But for some reason, they translated that and then wondered why it sold like 8 copies total. It's like stuff like that. There was a really cool. Like sword fighting action RPG name, which I can't even think of the name of it, but it had like a dude with like red hair on the cover. I can see it clearly, but I can't remember the title. And I think NIS localized it in like the early days of the PS3. Like, yeah, it's just now is the time. Like people don't care for some reason. The PS3 and 360 are caught in this sweet spot where like hardcore collectors don't care yet. But it's not old enough for the stuff to be worth money.
Yeah.
PS2 has started to transition. PS2, Xbox, GameCube have now transitioned into like proper retro territories. Like I can't get a copy of Khemia 2 for less than $55-$60 if I want it. But like PS3 and 360, for some reason, like nobody cares.
Yeah, I think there's still a certain degree of them being regarded as almost current. I mean,
Yeah.
although they're both like 10 years old plus,
Yeah.
but there is still a certain proportion of people who consider those to be current consoles, even though they haven't been for quite a while. I mean, like our big GameStop equivalent here, Game, has, I think it's only just stopped stocking PS3 and 360 games, and like, yeah. So I mean, it was mostly pre-owned stuff that they were doing, but they've been sort of clinging on to that for quite a while, and still been selling pre-owned consoles and that sort of thing. So they've only just stopped doing that. So I think there's still a perception that these are sort of consoles that everyone has already, that they just want to sort of get rid of the games of in some ways. But yeah, a few years' time, they will probably become a lot more collectible. So stock up now.
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
All right, anyway, that went off on a bit of a tangent. But yeah, Test Drive Unlimited is fun. But yeah, so that is pretty much everything I've been playing to date. I've been playing a bit of Demon's Souls as well, but I will probably save that for another time. I did a short play video on that recently as well, so if you want to check out a little bit of how that all works and my responses to that recently, then have a look at that on there. So for now, let's take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about our main topic for today, which is Inti Creates. So we'll see you in a moment.
3, 2, 1, go!
Welcome back. For our main topic today, we wanted to spend some time talking about Inti Creates, who are a favourite developer of both of us. Chris, you've been sort of in contact with them a bit longer than I have, I think, because you're more familiar with some of their earlier work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be counting on you today to educate me about some of their earlier stuff, and then I'm sure we can both talk about some of their more recent releases.
The alternative title for this episode is going to be How Many Times Can Chris Say Mega Man Within the Scope of 1 Hour?
Yeah. So I mean, my primary experience with Inti Creates is modern stuff like Galgun, Blaster Master Zero, Azure Striker Gunvolt, Mighty Number 9, and Mighty Gunvolt Burst, and all of those are things I've previously done a cover game feature about on MoeGamer, so do check that out if you want to sort of read some stuff as well as listening to us babble on about them. So, I mean, where to start, really? So, what was your sort of initial contact with the company then?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should just, for a moment, talk historical retrospective.
Sure.
So, like, you can't really talk about Inti Creates without understanding who Inti Creates is. Inti Creates was formed by 10 members of, like, Capcom from its glory days.
Yes. This was back in like 1996 or so, wasn't it?
That's right. 1996, May 8th, 1996, they were founded, and their first game, Speed Power Gun Bike, came out in 98 for the PS.
That's such a good name for a game.
Yes. Have you ever seen Speed Power Gun Bike? Have you seen like the art for it?
Yes, I've seen some gameplay as well. It's like a bike that transforms into a mecha and a car and stuff. It's awesome and never got localized, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's right. And then their second game, which I think you would probably like, was I believe it was called Love and Destroy.
Yeah,
which is like a mecha piloting game with some visual novel elements.
Yes.
So yeah. They are essentially the company that you want to play games from if you want to play games that feel like late-era PS1, like Super Nintendo Capcom and late-era PS1 Capcom games. They are quite good at what they do. They have a very specific design sensibility, which is to harken back to kind of a lot of what made that great while being also mechanically innovative. So my first exposure to Inti Creates was most Western people's first exposure to Inti Creates because it was their first game to get Western published, which was Mega Man Zero for the Game Boy Advance. So Inti Creates was an independent publisher, but they still maintained a relationship with Capcom and would develop games to be published by Capcom, just from not within Capcom, essentially. So Mega Man Zero is very interesting because it came out kind of in this era where it was like, all right, let's take a thing and let's cram RPG elements into it. So Mega Man Zero is essentially an experiment to make Mega Man what I would call more substantial.
Yeah.
So it has what you would consider typical Mega Man structure. It has multiple stages with bosses, with abilities that you steal from the bosses. But it has a hub. So it feels a bit more like an RPG, right? Because there's a little hub, rebel base you go to where you can talk to people, advance the story. There's also like an equipment system where your weapons actually level up through use. So, like, you get the lightsaber because you're Zero, not Mega Man. And as your lightsaber levels up, you actually get deeper combos you can do. So you become more powerful over time. There's this system with these little creatures called cyber elves that you collect through play, which are sometimes randomly dropped through enemies, sometimes hidden in stages. And then you get currency that you feed to them to, like, level them up and increase their efficiency. But also, there's a caveat with the Cyber Elves, and this plays into something that Inti Creates would also become known for, which is a real emphasis on heavy skill-based gameplay and performance. So Mega Man Zero is brutally tough. The Cyber Elves make it easy by giving you enhanced jumping capabilities, or there's one that acts as a healing item, or there's ones that can freeze time or save you from a pitfall. But every time you use a Cyber Elf, it detracts from your score that you get at the end of the stage. And you have a running score that's like on the menu screen based on the amalgamation of your performance on all previous stages. And you can only get the best ending if your score is at a specific level when you beat the game. So heavy reliance on the Cyber Elves will prevent you from getting the best ending. Mm-hmm. So a major emphasis on your performance and kind of de-emphasizing the use of these crutches that they're giving you. But at the same time, you also can just like treat it like an RPG, use them as items, level them up, and like use the heck out of them, which is what I like to do because I'm terrible at video games. But it's essentially Mega Man where you can grind if you want.
Yeah.
And make yourself more powerful if you choose to do that, which is great. Later ones in the series, there's 4 Mega Man Zero games. Later ones would feel a bit more, even like Castlevania or Metroid style. They would have like maps and kind of larger, more open environments. These games are also known for kind of really building upon a narrative that's kind of dark and tragic, dealing with essentially the aftermath of the original Mega Man X games, where Mega Man himself has become like an oppressive evil figure.
Yeah.
And then you're like part of a rebellion against him in the first couple games in the series. So just a really interesting story, beautiful character design, and also some of the best damn pixel art you'll ever see, which will be a hallmark of this discussion. Now, there are a ton of flaws, too, with the Mega Man Zero series, the biggest of which being that it's on the Game Boy Advance. So one of the things it suffers from, which hampers its ability to be a really solid action game, especially considering how much it demands from you from a performance perspective, is, and many Game Boy Advance games suffer from this because of the screen aspect ratio and resolution of the Game Boy Advance. It's very cramped. And your character is a bit big on the screen, and it's really easy for like surprise things to come in from off screen and smack you through like no fault of your own. So it's a bit of a challenge, like fighting against the limitations of the hardware. But that's not to say that these aren't exemplary games. And you can get all 4 of them on the Mega Man 0/ZX collection that is now available for the Switch and PS4.
Yes.
And of course, those were then followed up by Mega Man ZX and ZX Advent for the DS, which essentially was everything that was great about Mega Man 0, 1 through 4, enhanced and made better on the DS. The screen is less cramped, making them eminently more playable. There's now like armor transformations for the characters, because you play as these like kids that get these Mega Man inspired like armor sets instead of you just being Zero or Mega Man. And they build off the story of the Zero games. It's a continuation. And they are just... It's hard to really describe that they are just top-tier pixel art side-scrollers in a very classic vein with some modern conveniences. They're the best of what they do. Killer soundtrack, beautiful presentation. Just phenomenal stuff. Looking at the list of Inti Creates stuff, like, a very large portion of their stuff wasn't released in the West too. Like there's a lot of games that they did that were based on like Japanese properties that were popular in Japan but not super popular in the West. Things like they did games based on Crayon Shin-chan, which is a comedy cartoon that's really popular in Japan. That there's some following of it in the West due to some versions of it that were localized, but not a huge following. So like none of those games came West. They made a Doraemon game. But I mean, after the Mega Man ZX stuff, the next thing that really came out in the West they did would have been Mega Man 9, which is probably where modern people know them best from, because it was one of the earliest examples of what we like to talk about here, which is like the rose-tinted modern retro style.
Yes, yeah.
Have you? You're not a huge Mega Man guy, right? So have you played any of these?
I've briefly played like a demo of I think 9,
okay.
But I haven't spent a lot of time with it. But I remember the discussions over this game when it first came out, and I had a lot of friends who were very much into Mega Man and were hugely excited by this game and how sort of authentic it felt to their memories of Mega Man.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. Mega Man 9 and later Mega Man 10 were new 8-bit Mega Man games that were made in 2008 and 2010 respectively. And it's just one of the earliest examples of this phenomenon, which we've come to love now, which other games we'll talk about, specifically Inti Creates, right? The Bloodstained Curse of the Moon games. They're just kind of the best at doing this, making 8-bit games that feel good and make you think about the old 8-bit things but include modern conveniences and smoothness and a little bit updated tech in a way that's not obtrusive. But, I mean, Mega Man 7 was 16-bit, right, on the Super Nintendo. Mega Man 8 was 32-bit on the Saturn and PS1. So, like, Mega Man had been modernized for 7 and 8, but Mega Man 9 on the modern consoles, the Wii, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3, they just decided, well, hey guys, let's make them 8-bit again. And it's just authentic 8-bit Mega Man. And they would later add stuff like different playable characters, Proto Man and Bass become playable with slightly different mechanics. But it's just 8-bit Mega Man with a little bit of modern flair, and they're wonderful. And you can now own them physically if you buy the Mega Man Legacy Collection. Volume 2 has them both available to have physically.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think it made a lot of sense for them to go back 8-bit for those ones, because although, as you say, Mega Man had been modernised, I think the fact that it had so many installments on the NES in the first place means that even now people tend to just associate that series with being an 8-bit series.
Sure.
And I think sort of the attempt to capture the nostalgia, sort of the most potent way that they were going to be able to do that was to take that original NES aesthetic, and I think that was a really smart choice on their point, because that was a big reason why those games appeal to a lot of people I knew, because they I say they felt like new Mega Man games. They were new Mega Man games.
Sure.
For that felt like and looked like and sounded like the games that they'd grown up with. So yeah, that was a really, really good use of nostalgia.
Yeah, and this
informed design. Yeah,
it was smart on Capcom's part too, because it was just like, listen, you guys are all the guys who made Mega Man great originally. You guys have been killing it with these subcontracted Zero and ZX games you've been making that we've been publishing. We're just okay, guys. Just make the new Mega Man. So they did that, and it was great. And I don't know, did you play Mega Man 11 came out recently, and Inti Creates didn't make it, and I didn't really love it.
Yeah.
I liked it fine, but I didn't feel about it the same way I did like 9, 10, and the ZX and X and Zero games. It just something didn't feel right about it. So I don't know. There's just something about the way Inti Creates makes Mega Man, and the way an Inti Creates Mega Man game handles and plays. It feels right and authentic, and that's mainly because it's mostly people who worked on the original ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool. Well, if we're going chronologically, as you say, there's a bunch more sort of licensed stuff. A lot of which I don't think came over here. There's like a Naruto game and some other stuff, and some more Crayon Shin-chan. They did a lot of Crayon Shin-chan over the years.
Yeah, they really did.
They also did the 3DS version of Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures, which I never knew. Yeah, it's exciting.
They did a Power Rangers game too.
Yeah. So I mean, the next game chronologically that I came into contact with them would have been Galgun Double Peace, which originally came out in 2015 for PlayStation 4 and Vita, and then subsequently Windows as well. So this, I don't think this was my first ever contact with them, because I was sort of familiar with the Mega Man Zero and ZX games, but didn't actually play them. But I guess Galgun Double Peace must have been the first Inti Creates game that I really kind of engaged with fully. Mm-hmm. Again, this is another one I've written about extensively on MoeGamer, but the interesting thing about this game is that it's very kind of experimental in terms of structure. So if you've not come across this before, Galgun Double Peace is the sequel to a game that didn't get localized, just called Galgun. And the idea is that it's riffing on the idea of sort of classic light gun rail shooters. But what it's done is it's made it non-violent, and it's made it's crossed it over with a dating sim as well. And so Galgun Double Peace is structured very much like a visual novel, in that there's different sort of narrative routes you can take through the game. But in between the storytelling sequences, you have these sequences where you're wandering through various environments, and you're shooting characters. But like I say, it's non-violent. So you're shooting girls who've become overly sexually attracted to you thanks to the input of a angel's arrow that was accidentally shot into your ass, that was 30 times more powerful than it was supposed to be. It was just supposed to help you find a girlfriend, but instead it's helping you find all of the girlfriends, which is a little bit too much for you to handle. So you have to fend them off using your Euphoria pheromone shot. And send them into fits of quasi-orgasmic ecstasy in order to get them off your back for a few minutes. And then surrounding all that nonsense, there's like various different plots surrounding the actual main characters in the game. There's a demon hunter girl. There's the angel who sort of caused this whole mess in the first place. There's the demon hunter girl's sister, and then there's the devil who's causing a lot of trouble around the school as well. So there's all these different narrative paths to follow based on a combination of the choices that you make in the game, and your dating stem cell stats that you can manipulate over the course of the game as well. So between levels you can collect items or purchase items that will allow you to change your stats in various areas. And there's also a mode in the game called Doki Doki mode, which is basically like a smart bomb, but in order to trigger that, what you do is you draw girls into your Doki Doki field, and then you basically poke and prod them in various places until they experience double peace, which is again basically quasi-orgasmic ecstasy accompanied by peace signs. And And that causes them to explode in a shower of love and take out everything nearby. But it also affects your stats in the process as well. So every girl in the game has their own unique effect on your stats. So there's this incredibly complicated metagame in here about manipulating your stats in order to get with the girl that you're particularly interested in. Sort of the final thing you unlock in the game is a mode called True Love mode, where you basically can date any of the characters in the game. But in order to do that, you have to have the right stats in order to make sure that they're interested in you. And once you get to that point in the game, there's just such a surprising amount of mechanical depth to this game that it doesn't necessarily make itself immediately apparent when you first start playing. It just seems to be this sort of ridiculous, candy-coloured comedy anime style thing where you're just shooting girls until they screech in pleasure at you. But no, there is a lot to this game. And I was delighted to explore and discover it when I first came across this, and I spent a lot of time with it.
It's kind of Inti Creates in a nutshell, right? They make these games that are candy-colored and like beautifully aesthetic from like a cartoon perspective, but then they just pack them with like proper mechanical depth, which is in like a way that like belies. Like I know, like I've been saying like just Mega Man, it's just Mega Man, but like there's a specific mechanical excellence to proper Mega Man that can't be emulated. It's like
and I mean like you say, Mega Man 11 missed out on that because evidently the people who developed it didn't sort of quite understand that mechanical depth and the specific things that Inti Creates did with their take on Mega Man over the years. So they are sort of real masters of game design, sort of the whole sort of easy to learn, hard to master type thing, I guess, is a good way of looking at it.
And that's something we'll talk about too once we get to the Gunvolt games, because that's a very core part of the design sensibility of the Gunvolt games.
I mean, well, I guess now is as good a time as any to bring those up, because the first Gunvolt first came out in 2014. My first contact with it was a little bit later. It was when the Switch port came out. But the first Azure Striker Gunvolt came out in 2014 on 3DS, and then got a PC release in 2015. So these games, would you say they're inspired by their work on Mega Man in terms of structure and mechanics? I mean, you know more about sort of the comparisons between them. Obviously, there's an aesthetic resemblance between them, but in terms of mechanics and structure, is it pretty similar? Would you say?
I would. Yes and no. I mean, there's obviously like Mega Man-ness to Gunvolt, right? Like you're a blue man, and you make your way through challenging stages which are themed, and then you fight a themed boss, and then you take abilities from that themed boss, and you move along. But the big difference between the design sensibility of classic Mega Man and what the Gunvolt games tries to do is something that could have only been done by an independent developer, right? So the Gunvolt games are published by Inti Creates as well as developed by them. So they're highly experimental in their mechanics. And something that is important to discuss about Gunvolt is it's kind of the design theory that I discussed earlier with Mega Man Zero, where you can make it as easy or as hard on yourself as you want with a focus on skill, like extrapolated to the nth degree. So like this is something I think a lot of people, when they discuss the Gunvolt games when they originally came out, couldn't really wrap their heads around, is the notion that Gunvolt's games are essentially designed in such a way as to be performative. Now, so what I mean by performative is think about the design of Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry is not... 3 is, but like for the most part, Devil May Cry was never a particularly hard game, but the focus on Devil May Cry was performance. How can you vary your combos and demonstrate your mastery of the gameplay mechanics, different attacks, patterns, and timing in order to achieve high ranks and really show your skill and mastery of those systems? The Gunvolt games are an effort to take that kind of design and apply it to a Mega Man-style side-scroller. So, in the Gunvolt games, and you can chime in on this because you've actually engaged with them even more heavily than I have, you're essentially invincible as long as you don't get hammered too much at once. Like, you can take hits and you phase through them using like whatever like special power you have, and you have to get hit a lot and like deplete this like shield meter before your life points even get touched. So like, now that's something you can turn off if you choose to, and that's all part of the game. So the notion of Gunvolt is to use the unique combat and dodging and ducking and weaving to achieve good scores at the end of the stages. So the challenge in Gunvolt isn't necessarily will I live or die making it through the stage. It's pretty easy to be terrible and still make it through a Gunvolt stage.
Yes.
But the score you get based on how much you got hit, how you used your abilities, how long you took, how many times you died, that all influences your score. So the emphasis here is more of a score chase than it is a survival mentality.
Yeah. So, I mean, we haven't mentioned how Gunvolt plays for those who aren't familiar, but basically the core mechanical thing in Gunvolt is that rather than shooting enemies to defeat them directly, what you do is you shoot them to lock onto them, and you can lock onto a bunch of enemies depending on what gun you've got equipped. And once you're locked onto enemies, you can then shoot these homing bolts of lightning out of Gunvolt, and they will hit and damage the enemies for as long as you've got energy remaining. So yeah, again, as you say, there's... you can sort of muddle your way through the levels using this system because you don't have to be especially accurate in order to kill things in Gunvolt. But in order to get those good scores and the big multipliers and that sort of thing, you need to do things like lock onto a bunch of enemies at the same time and defeat them all together or defeat them in a particular order or all that sort of thing as well. So the other thing with Gunvolt is there's a very in-depth sort of equipment and crafting system as well based on things that you collect throughout the level. So there's quite a strong focus on replaying missions to gather various items and craft pieces of equipment for Gunvolt. And rather than the equipment adjusting Gunvolt's stats, what they all tend to do is they adjust the way the game plays quite significantly.
In some places,
so, for example,
making it an entirely different game. Occasionally.
Exactly. So there's a gun, for example, that completely removes this whole homing lightning thing and turns it into a Mega Man game, basically. Equally, there's like a ring you can put on that kind of nullifies the whole invincibility thing we just talked about, but rockets your score up into astronomical proportions. So you can't get hit because you'll die immediately, but you can get massively higher scores by doing that. So it's all about sort of managing these different things that you collect and putting the right combination of equipment on to deal with various different circumstances in the game, and figure out the best way you want to play, and also how to prove yourself to the game in certain ways as well. So it's a very flexible, deep and complex game if you want it to be. But equally, if you just want to play through and you just want to see how the story ends and that sort of thing, you can just kind of rattle your way through without any real sort of too much difficulty.
Yeah. It's a series for people who love thinking about side-scroller mechanics. What are different ways we can make a side-scroller is essentially what this series is about. Like, what does a Mega Man style game mean to you, and how can we subvert those expectations and make you recontextualize what combat in a side scroller looks and feels like?
Yeah. And so the thing with Gunvolt is sort of figuring out these various mechanics that the equipment provides for you, and then applying the use of those in various different circumstances. So the design of the stages and the boss fights in particular in Gunvolt is heavily sort of old school pattern based, and sort of looking at animation cues and all that sort of thing. So what you might find is that a boss you are having a bit of difficulty with, you can sort of change up your strategy in terms of what equipment you've got on there, and it will very much affect how that encounter unfolds, because although the boss is doing the same things, if you equip yourself with a particular ability that makes it easier to, say, dodge some of their attacks or get in some attacks during a particular opening, then yeah, it's all about experimenting with these mechanics, understanding the best ways to play and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a game that could easily be very daunting, but I think they did a pretty good job of making it feel accessible.
Absolutely.
Because this was really sort of, I guess this was probably the first game of this kind that I'd really played, sort of thinking of like a a 2D side scroller that isn't an open structure exploration based one, but is instead very focused on its combat mechanics and progression mechanics and skill based gameplay. It was probably the first game of that type that I really engaged with. So I could have easily been very quickly put off this game, but they make it accessible enough that it really eases you in, and as you explore the game further, it really encourages you to try out different things and see what works for you.
Yeah, that's the difference between this game and something like, say, a Dark Souls, which is also like a heavily mechanics-based game. It's hard to fail at Gunvolt. It's really hard to fail at Gunvolt. If anything, it's easier than a traditional Mega Man game. It puts the onus of challenging. The game doesn't challenge you, it requests that you challenge yourself. So, it allows you to muddle your way through it, to be practically invincible, to see all the cool stuff, but then gradually, by allowing you to unlock these different items, it says to you, hey, you had fun doing that, why don't you try this and see how it might be different? So, it openly encourages a lot of exploration, and in that, finding joy in challenge, for the sake of challenging yourself. It doesn't present brick walls, it presents opportunities. So it's a very open and welcoming structure to the way it's put together.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And then the spin-off game, Gunvolt Chronicles Luminous Avenger X, is the same way. That's a semi-sequel to Gunvolt, Azure Striker Gunvolt 1 and 2, where you play as Gunvolt's rival Copen, I don't know. But his whole deal is his mechanics are very similar, but he has a dash mechanic. So whereas Gunvolt can shoot enemies to tag them, then home on his lightning, Copen has to make physical contact with the enemies in order to tag them, then back off, then fire his homing shots. But the difference with Copen is that the tags he uses to lock on to those enemies are also the currency in his shield gauge. So the more enemies you lock onto at a given time, the more open you are to being hit. So you're constantly playing a balancing act between, do I tag 3 enemies or 4 enemies or however much ammo you have in this meter at once, making myself completely open to being hit and harmed, or do you play it safe and tag enemies one at a time and take them out? One method is riskier and will see you getting a better completion time for the level. One is more conservative and will see you survive much easier but get a much lower score. So it's all about how you want to challenge yourself and how you want to approach your gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
It's neat. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, I haven't played the whatever the latest one's called yet, but it's good to know that it builds on Copen, because Copen was a playable character in Gunvolt 2 as well, and used a lot of those mechanics like the air dash and locking onto things and using bullets with special abilities attached to them, and that sort of thing. And he actually does absorb abilities from bosses that he beats in a bit more of a sort of Mega Man style, so you can then equip those abilities and use them against subsequent foes as well. So for those looking for a slightly more Mega Man-esque experience, Copen's gameplay is a bit more like that, but it's still got its own unique twists and wrinkles on that as well. So,
which is also, I think, too, a good opportunity to talk about Mighty Number 9. Which also had some interesting mechanical wrinkles that I think is part of the reason why people were so disappointed with it, because it wasn't a traditional Mega Man game. Inti Creates seems to have this obsession with the notion that simply shooting an enemy isn't enough. You have to tag them and then perform another task to wipe them out entirely. So Mighty Number 9 did a similar thing where what's the main character of Mighty Number 9's name? Beck.
Yeah.
Beck can't Beck shoots Mega Man style, a buster on his arm, but he doesn't. His shots do not kill enemies, it merely stuns the enemies. Then you have to dash through them to dissipate them. So once again, in the same way we talked about Gunvolt, you can just shoot enemies one by one and dash through them. but the real emphasis is to compete for score. And the way you achieve higher scores is to tag multiple enemies at once and then dash through them in sequence. So like the more enemies you have tagged and paralyzed and then dash at once, you'll get a better performance rating. So it's all in how you want to handle that. It puts the onus on you to challenge yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also a way of sort of clearing the game more efficiently. Like the boss fights are all heavily based on this dash mechanic as well. So it places even more strong emphasis on finding openings to put in attacks than like your conventional Mega Man side of things. So I really liked Mighty Number 9.
Oh, as did I. I think it's a great game.
Yeah. It's just a shame that it's lumbered with the reputation that its Kickstarter left it with. Now so many people are so unwilling to engage with it on its own terms now that it's a real shame, because it's a really interesting game with lots of cool mechanics, some challenging levels, and some cool abilities, some interesting level design, some great boss design. It's Inti Creates doing what they do well.
Yeah, it's poster child of what we're always saying. If you take it out of the context of the news cycle and the uproar and the community discussions, and you just engage with it on its own terms, it's full of interesting ideas. Like, abandon your expectations and just play it. It's quite good.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, at this point, we can sort of talk a little bit about Mighty Gunvolt Burst and Mighty Gunvolt, which were sort of spin-offs of both of those series that we talked about there. So, I haven't played the original Mighty Gunvolt, but that was more a sort of proof of concept game, whereas Mighty Gunvolt Burst was very much expanded into a full game.
And I'm on the other side of that. It's like, you've played Burst. I've not played Burst. I've only played the original because I received it for free as a Mighty Number 9 backer.
Yeah, it was a Kickstarter bonus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That they subsequently released separately. So I mean, tell me a bit about the original Mighty Gunvolt first, then, because I haven't played it at all, so I'm not familiar with it.
It's just like cute and little, and it's just it's an 8-bit kind of. I would describe it as like a pocket game. Right? Like, you can play through it in like 10 minutes. Like, the levels are short. It's more just kind of challenge-based and challenge yourself to get good times and good scores. But it's a Mega Man-style game where you can play as either Beck or Gunvolt, and like cute versions of them. And I think one of the kids from Galgun as well. One of the girls.
Yes, I think you'd be Echo, can't you? I think.
So, and each has slightly different mechanics that changes the cadence of the game. And you just kind of play through this 8-bit version of kind of Gunvolt's world with the similar bosses and stuff, and challenge yourself to do kind of subsequent playthroughs and do better. Try to do perfect runs, try to get good scores. It's not a huge thing because it was a treat that was given away for free. It was just like a little bonus snack of a game.
Yeah. So basically what they did with Mighty Gunvolt Burst was take the ideas you've just described there and then expand it into a much more substantial game. They also sort of took a slightly different approach in that while Mighty Gunvolt kind of reimagined Gunvolt levels in this sort of 8-bit style, what Mighty Gunvolt Burst did was it took the Mighty Number 9 levels and reimagined them in this. So again, it provided a bit of a twist for those people who had played that previous version. So what you've got here is you've got Beck and Gunvolt as playable characters. You've also got Ekaro from Galgun again. And then the original digital release had various DLC characters, including Kurina, who is the devil from Galgun.
Yay.
Call, who is the female robot from Mighty Number 9. You've got Jewel and Lumen from Gunvolt, which is the sort of main female character on there. The DLC character from Mighty Number 9, Ray, and Copen from Azure Striker Gunvolt 2 as well. So I believe, if I remember correctly, there is a limited run release of this coming soon, isn't there?
Yeah, it was just recently
that bundles all that together. So if you haven't played this yet, it might be worth waiting for that, because you can get everything all together in one package. Now, what you have in Mighty Gunvolt Burst is you have sort of old school Mega Man style levels in that you progress through them in a linear fashion. But again, it's built quite heavily for replay value. In that there's like collectible items around each level. You have an upgrade system that's very similar to what you talked about with the Cyber Elves thing, in that they can make your life significantly easier, but the more of them you use, the lower score you'll get. So there's it's been a while since I played it, but if I remember correctly, it's like almost like a sort of multiplier style mechanic, where the fewer upgrades you apply to Gunvolt before you start a level, the higher the score you will get. And so again, you can get through the game making use of all these upgrades relatively easily. But the real challenge in the long term is supposed to be trying to take off each of these training wheels one by one and eventually be able to tackle through the whole game using just the base performance of the characters. And each of those characters I described handles very differently as well, and it's all based on their mechanics from the original games where applicable, and in terms of the characters from a very different type of game, like the characters from Galgun, they incorporate their own unique things along the way as well. So for example, Ekiro can fly, for example, because she's an angel, so that makes some of the platforming sequences handle very differently. Kurana, if I remember correctly, is a lot faster than all of the other characters, but her health bar is about a quarter of the size, so you have to play her very, very carefully. And so yeah, there's a lot of variation between how the different characters play, how they respond to the different upgrades, how the different levels work with each of them. So there's a relatively small number of levels in there, but that means that you can learn them a lot more easily with one of the characters and then try and apply the mechanics from the different characters to try and make it through with all of them. So again, it's a game that's very much about encouraging you to challenge yourself rather than necessarily being challenged by the game structure itself. It's a game that you can finish in probably a couple of hours, but if you want to go back and sort of play it with all of those other characters, it can then keep you busy for a very long time indeed if you want it to.
I love it. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the limited run release of that. I have not played it yet, mainly because I recognized how much DLC was happening with it with the special release, and I was like, I had seen at that point that it was when that game first came out, it was just at like the cusp of when this whole like limited press release thing was happening, and I was like, I'm gonna hold out, I'm gonna see what happens. And then the Striker pack for Azure Striker Gunvolt came out that same year for the Switch. And the 3DS, so I was like, okay, Inti Creates is starting to partner with physical publishers now, so I just kind of said I would wait, and I did. So now I'm going to get that for sure. Same with Blaster Master Zero. I waited on those because I saw how much DLC they were getting, and now they're coming out physically from limited time.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, Blaster Master Zero. So have you not played this one at all yet?
I have not played any Blaster Master Zero. I'm an old school Blaster Master fan. Like, I love the original, but I have not played the Inti Creates versions. I just am aware of how beautiful they are, but I have not played them yet.
Yeah, I've only played the first Blaster Master Zero, but I think that was the first game I played on my Switch, if I remember correctly, because I got my Switch and I got a copy of Cave Story physically, and then I also knew that I wanted to play Blaster Master Zero, so I think that was the first game I downloaded on my Switch.
That was a very early Switch game. That was one of the first, one of the first eShop games. Yeah,
definitely. But it's great. It's very much a reimagining of the original Blaster Master to such a degree that, like, I believe most of the maps are pretty much identical to the NES original. But what they've done is they've added, they've sort of tightened up the mechanics in a lot of places, cleared up a lot of the sort of NES sort of technical issues. Like, this is a great example of what we talk about as enhanced retro. So it looks like an NES game, but then it's also got stuff like parallax scrolling that the NES wouldn't have been capable of. It gets rid of stuff like sprite flicker. It has a lot more stuff going on screen. It has a lot more in the way of story and text along the way, although a lot of it's optional as well. So if you're not interested in that side of things, you can skip it completely, which is nice for those who grew up with sort of the mechanic-centric version of this game. There's some impressive boss fights. There's sort of lots of weapons to collect. And then they added this whole new section to the end of the game as well. There's like a true ending sequence based on what you do elsewhere in the game that can take you to this final stage where it kind of shifts out of the NES aesthetic into more sort of PC Engine style aesthetic, where it sort of adds some more complex backgrounds and more colours on screen and more detailed enemies and so on. And when I first heard about this, I thought it would be really jarring, but it works brilliantly. It's just like a real feeling that you're sort of being rewarded for your hard work getting through the rest of the game, and you have this really impressive finale to work through then, and it's a really satisfying game that I very much enjoyed. Blaster Master, as someone who didn't own an NES back in the day, it's not a game I was particularly familiar with, so sort of experiencing it for the first time in this way was a real pleasure. And interestingly, if you know your Blaster Master history as well, there's a lot of sort of homages to that in Blaster Master Zero. So I talked a bit about this in my feature that I did there. So Blaster Master has its roots as a Famicom game called Cho Wakase Senki Metafight, which it talks about the story of the planet of Sophia 3, which is under attack by the forces of the Invim Dark Star Cluster, led by the evil Goez. So, a blonde-haired woman named Dr. Jennifer Cornett developed a mobile battle tank known as the Metal Attacker, or Nora, and enlisted the young prodigy Kane Gardner to pilot it. So, the story for Blaster Master was completely different, if you're familiar with the NES version. It has this stupid story about a kid who had a frog named Fred, which caught radiation or something, and that made a big hole in his garden, and he fell into it and fell into a battle tank called Sophia 3, and so on. But yeah, what they've done in Blaster Master Zero is they've taken that original concept and sort of made it a little bit more plausible, in that it's now set in sort of a post-apocalyptic world where the main character Jason is researching sort of old Earth, and he found his frog as like a surviving remnant of this old planet and so on, and it kind of builds on there. But there's things like some of the characters in Blaster Master Zero are obvious homages to the original Metafight. So, for example, this new character that they introduced called Eve, who is this blonde-haired android, she's very much an homage to Dr. Jennifer Cornett from Metafight, who you can see on Metafight's cover art. She's this sort of blonde-haired 90s anime woman. And there's a scene in which she's described as being created by Dr. Jennifer Gardner, which is a combination of Dr. Jennifer Cornett and the protagonist Kane Gardner's names, and so on like that. So there's tons of interesting little fan service elements in Blaster Master Zero that shows a kind of profound respect for what they're building on, but then also making it its own thing as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic game that is well worth playing, and as we said, there was a limited press version of this went up for pre-order a while back. I believe the pre-order's closed for that now. So unfortunately, you have missed out on that if you haven't jumped on there. But it is still available on various digital storefronts as well, so it's well worth playing.
PS4 now too. It was originally a Switch-only thing, but now you can get it on the PS4.
That's right. Yes.
Same with Gunvolt too. Gunvolt is now available on the PS4.
Yes. Yeah. And again, there was a bunch of DLC with this as well. So they brought in characters from other places. So Galgun from Ekiro from Galgun, again, put in an appearance as a DLC character. There were some of the Gunvolt characters in there. And perhaps most notably, they brought in Shantae as well, as a playable DLC character. And she's a lot of fun just because she plays completely differently to the kind of range combat centric characters. Shantae is very melee based, so in the top down action sequences they play very differently as Shantae to how they do as Jason or any of the other DLC characters. So yeah, it's another great example of Inti Creates at work. They're making a game that is easy to understand but has a lot of depth to it. It has a lot of replay value. There's a lot of mechanical interest. And yeah, it's great. It's just a fine example of what they do best.
Also, too, it's a good opportunity to mention the friendly relationship between WayForward and Inti Creates.
Yes.
And how, like, for Shantae and the Pirate's Curse and Half Genie Hero, Inti Creates actually contributed to the static character art for the dialogue sequences.
Yes.
So they're buddies. And then Half Genie Hero had a DLC where you could get a Sophia tank transformation for Shantae. It crossed over.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Good times. What else is there to talk about with these guys? Apparently, Gunvolt 3 has been announced at this point.
Yes.
We don't know anything about that. But that really just leaves Dragon marked for death.
There's Bloodstained as well.
Oh, yeah. Blood. I feel like we've paid so much lip service to Curse of the Moon on this podcast. We talk about it constantly.
Yeah. Well, it is a fantastic game.
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah.
But yes. I think you're probably right. We probably have talked that one to death so far. So let's move on to Dragon Mark for Death, because you found some interesting stuff about this recently, didn't you? About sort of the history of it and how it came to be.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, Dragon Mark for Death, which is kind of one of the latest games from Inti Creates, which is in its own way an original game. A lot of their games are kind of I don't want to say unoriginal, but many of their games are linked to kind of the legacy of something else, right? Like usually inspired by Mega Man or something of that nature. Dragon Marked for Death is very much a totally original concept, wherein it's in a medieval setting and it's focus on online multiplayer and RPG elements, so leveling up, collecting items, upgrading your items. And there was a recent interview on the PlayStation blog to celebrate the impending PS4 release of it, that it's actually been in concept since 2006. So I had no idea that this game had actually conceptually been in development at Inti Creates for such a long time. And there's actually as part of this interview, images of design documents and screenshots harkening back to its origins, potentially as a PSP title. So this is something they've been working on for quite a long time. I was really surprised to see that. Development originally halted in 2010, and the PSP version was never released or brought to completion. Oh, also PS3 apparently is intended to be multi-platform.
Yeah.
Just super interesting that I love it when this happens, right? When something that's been in the development cooker for so long is finally able to become something that's tangible. It's a really, really interesting game.
And so from the look of things, Dragon Mark for Death was only able to sort of be brought back from the dead, as it were, thanks to the success of stuff like Gunvolt.
Sure.
So because they basically needed to start over and develop it for modern platforms and revamp the way they were thinking of it and so on. They needed to handle it themselves rather than rely on publishers. So I believe they were originally working with Marvelous for the PSP version, but they managed to convince them to sort of hand over all the sort of rights relating to it and start back up and developing it from scratch as their own independent project. It sounds like it's gone through a lot of iterations over the years, and I know when it first came out, we kind of bounced off it a little bit for various reasons. It is something I'm keen to revisit at some point because there's a lot of interesting things going on there.
They've added two more characters since we last played it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the challenge with Dragon Mark for Death is that, again, I don't know if I want to apply this to all of it because there's so many different ways to play it, but there's certain characters in that game have a very high expectation of player skill and dexterity and agility and so on. Like I'm thinking of the was it the witch character I was playing?
Yeah.
When we started, so the way the witch character works in this is that you press the face buttons on your controller to conjure up various elemental runes, and the order in which you do that determines the spells that you cast. And so, being able to play as the witch in that game, you can't just hammer an attack button because you don't have an attack button. You have to be able to put in these button combinations repeatedly and quickly, and that sort of thing. And it's it's really satisfying when you get it right, but it's exhausting when you first start playing.
Well, the thing to understand about Dragon Marked for Death, and this is one of the reasons I bounce off it, is some games are multiplayer games. And some games are multiplayer games in the sense that, like, we've made a game, it's also multiplayer. You can play it multiplayer. It's got multiplayer modes. Dragon Marked for Death is designed in such a way that the multiplayer aspects of it are baked into every design element of the game. So many of the characters, there's maybe like one character or two characters who are viable solo.
Yeah.
Like that witch character you've designed is not viable solo. I can't imagine that the later boss battles playing her solo. Now, where she shines, like I specifically mained the knight because I knew you were maining the witch, right? If you play the witch, I as the knight, a warrior, can generate a shield that regens health. So if you can prep your spells behind my shield, regen your health. Like, the characters are designed in such a way that their abilities interlock, and many of them are useless on their own.
Yeah.
So playing Dragon Marked for Death single player is a very difficult proposition.
Yeah.
And since
that said, since we've played it, they are like now on version like 3.9 or whatever, or 4.0 or whatever. So there have been some significant changes to the game since we last played it, I think. So
yes.
I'm very interested to return to it and see what an impact that's had on both the single player experience and multiplayer as well. And as you say, there's new characters been introduced and all sorts. So yeah, it's an interesting. I still don't know if it's for me, just mainly because I don't love multiplayer. But it is Inti Creates, right? It's mechanically rich. It's visually stunning. The pixel art is among the best you will ever see in your life. Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's worth checking out because it's so different. But it's another example of what we've been talking about in terms of their entire approach to development, and that it's taken extremely classic mechanics and ideas and modernized them and innovated it uniquely. And it's wholly theirs. Like there's no way you can see it or play it and not know it's an Inti Creates game if you haven't, haven't played if you've played their other stuff.
Yes,
it's just
definitely.
They remain one of the few developers out there where like I will just squeal like a freaking guinea pig whenever even like any inkling of them working on something new happens. You know, I always want to know what they're up to. I always want to know what's coming from them. And even when they do something that's not necessarily for me, stuff like Dragon Marked for Death or the Galgun games, they're made so well that I still respect and have tremendous interest in them.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I want to highlight, I think, as well, is something that came up when I was putting together my Inti Creates feature back on MoeGamer, which is that as time has gone on, Inti Creates has very much embraced the idea of being a global developer.
Yes.
So rather than being a Japanese developer who just happens to get stuff localized, they have really embraced this idea of we're going to make these games and everyone's going to enjoy them. And a huge part of that is the people who work on their localization team in there as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a guy called Matt Papa who works for them. He was good enough to provide an interview for me when I was covering Inti Creates, and he had some really interesting and insightful comments to make on the whole situation. So what he said when I spoke to him, he joined in September 2014, and he was the first Westerner that the company had ever hired, and they brought him on board specifically to act as a sort of liaison between what they traditionally done in the Japanese market and the worldwide thing. So Matt Papa was very much focused on looking at what people were talking about on social media and the games that people were interested in scene coming to the West that hadn't done before. Like, he was the reason that we have Galgun in the West at all. Like, he really championed that game and said, right, we've got to bring this game to the West, because there is an audience of people who want to see this. It might be a fairly small audience, but it's still an audience of people who want to see this game. They're willing to spend money on it. They're willing to engage with it. They're willing to help make it a success. And there's no reason why we shouldn't cater to that audience, because it just makes good business sense to do that. And so, yeah, that is a really important part of Inti Creates' background and their current situation, because they are constantly designing these games not just for a Japanese audience but for a worldwide audience. It's really to their benefit.
Yeah, and just Matt Papa's engagement on social media is just really heartwarming and pleasant. It's clear. Yeah. It's clear how much they respect and care about the people who respect and care about their products.
Yeah, exactly. And there's none of the sort of corporate bullshit in that regard either. Like, he's just a guy who is really enthusiastic about not just the games he works on, but sort of popular culture in general. Like, as I'm recording this, he's been live tweeting an Idolmaster concert that Bandai Namco have been broadcasting online, and he's just squeeing and coming out with Japanese onomatopoeia, and he's just having such a lovely time. And it's just so delightful to see someone like that have such a prominent role at a company like Inti Creates, because it infuses itself into the final products.
Yeah.
It comes across in their products, that passion, that feeling of enthusiasm, and we've created something that we're really proud of. We really hope you enjoy it. It really comes across in everything they do.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Like, when you play an Inti Creates game, like, even though I've said a bunch of times in this that, like, much of their work is, in a sense, tribute work, like nostalgia fueled work. There's no cynicism. There's no sense. Yeah. There's no sense of capitalization for monetization's sake. There's no sense of, like, we'll make a Mega Man style game because we know that sells to the kids. It's like, no, they make those kind of games because the people who work there have spent a lifetime making those kind of games. It's what they love to do, and it's what they're good at. It's just, whenever you engage with a creative work, be it a music, a film, a video game, a painting, a drawing, food, whatever, nothing in this world feels better than engaging with something created by a craftsman who loves what they're doing at the top of their game. Yeah. And that is what Inti Creates games feel like, consistently. Yep. Labors of love made by people who have honed their craft for decades. And it's just delightful.
Yeah. 100% agreed. All right, I think that's probably a good enough place to wrap that up there, unless you got anything else you want to add?
No, that feels like the cadence. That feels like I don't want to say anything else after that. That's my manifesto on Inti Creates.
Good stuff. So, yeah, play their games, buy their limited run stuff, buy their stuff so we get more of their stuff, basically.
Yeah, all the stuff.
All right. As always, then, would you like to tell people where to find you and your work online?
Absolutely. You can always find me on Instagram at Mr. GilderPixels or my own website, MrGilderPixels.com. I'm actually currently working on a portrait of Mega Man as we speak. So make sure to give me a follow and check out my progress on that.
Wonderful stuff. And you can find my writing every day on MoeGamer.net and my YouTube stuff on youtube.com/Pete Davison. So currently running on there, we've got the Atari A to Z series covering Atari 8-bit, Atari ST, and the games of the Atari Flashback Classics collection, along with the Final Fantasy Marathon, which is currently playing through Final Fantasy 3 on PSP. And the short play series where I just highlight games that I just feel like talking about that week, which is nice. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you can subscribe to an audio-only version over on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, and probably some other places I haven't thought of as well. And if you're listening to the audio-only version, you can watch a video version featuring footage of all the things we talk about over on the aforementioned YouTube channel. So, just remains for us to say, as always, thank you very much for watching and or listening, and we'll see you again next time.